Imagine being hated before you ever did anything to deserve it. Imagine growing up in a village full of people who cross the street when they see you coming, who whisper behind their hands, who smile at every other child but go quiet and cold the moment you walk into a room. You don't know why. Nobody will tell you why. All you know is that somewhere behind those tired, angry eyes is a secret the whole village is keeping from you, and that whatever it is, it's the reason you're alone. That's the world 12-year-old Naruto Uzumaki has always lived in. And if you think you know exactly how his story goes from here, stick around. Because this time, something is different. Something ancient is stirring behind those bright blue eyes of his, and it has nothing to do with the fox sealed in his belly. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because today we're cracking open an alternate universe where Naruto doesn't just carry the nine tails. He carries a bloodline the world thought was extinct. A dojutsu drowned with a sunken island a generation before he was even born. Today, we begin the story of the Blue Rinnegan. Let's get into it. The morning sun hadn't even finished climbing over the Hokage monument when Naruto Uzumaki was already awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of his tiny apartment, replaying the dream for the third night in a row. It was always the same shape. Always the same feeling. He was standing somewhere that wasn't quite Konoha. Somewhere with gray water stretching out in every direction, mist curling low over its surface like breath on a cold morning. And in that place, someone was always watching him. Not Kurama. He knew Kurama's presence by now, even locked behind its cage, even silent and sulking most of the time. This was different. Older. Quieter. A voice that never spoke words, just pressure, like being looked at by something enormous. And every time, right before he woke up, he'd catch a glimpse of his own reflection in that still gray water. Except it wasn't his reflection. Not really. The eyes staring back at him weren't blue like they should have been. They were a deeper, stranger blue, ringed in circles that rippled outward like something had just been dropped into a pond. He never told anyone about the dreams. Who would he even tell? Irika-sensei would worry. The other kids at the orphanage, back when he was still allowed to live there, would have laughed. And the villagers? The villagers would probably decide it was one more reason to hate him. So he kept it to himself, the way he kept most things to himself, and got out of bed to get ready for the day that was going to change his life, though he had absolutely no idea yet. Today was team assignment day. If you've watched even a little bit of this story before, you know how this part goes. You know about the failed graduation exam, about Mizuki's betrayal, about the nine-tailed seal and the truth that hit 12-year-old Naruto like a wrecking ball in the middle of a forest at night. You know he passed anyway, in his own chaotic, heart-on-his-sleeve way, by mastering a technique most chunin can't even use properly. You know the hard part was supposed to be over. It wasn't. Because passing the exam didn't erase 8 years of a village staring through him like he was made of smoke. It didn't make the other kids in Irika's classroom scoot their chairs away from him a little less. And when he sat down that morning in the same seat he'd sat in for years, orange jacket zipped up, headband tied crooked around his forehead because he'd done it in the dark without a mirror, he felt exactly as invisible as he always had, except for one person. Sasuke Uchiha sat 2 seats down, arms crossed, eyes closed, radiating the specific kind of silence that told everyone in the room not to bother him. Every girl in class had somehow rearranged the furniture of their entire social lives around orbiting him, and Naruto, who had spent years being compared unfavorably to Sasuke by literally everyone, teachers included, could not, for the life of him, understand what the fuss was about. Hey Sasuke. He leaned across the aisle, unable to help himself. Bet I could still take you in a fight. Sasuke didn't open his eyes. You lost to me at the Bell test tryouts. Twice. That doesn't count. You cheated. I didn't cheat. You definitely. The classroom door slid open and Irika walked in with a stack of folders under his arm, and the noise dropped to a simmer as 27 kids who'd spent a week celebrating being genin suddenly remembered they were about to find out who they'd be stuck with for the next several years of their lives. Naruto already had a bad feeling about it. Rhetorical question for you. Because I know some of you are new to this story and don't know how the teams shake out, but if you had to guess, out of the entire graduating class, Who do you think the universe decided to trap Naruto Uzumaki in a room with for the rest of his ninja career? If you guessed the top-scoring rookie who couldn't stand him and the top kunoichi who was in love with the top-scoring rookie who couldn't stand him, congratulations. You already know Team 7. Team 7, Irika read off the list, Naruto Uzumaki. Yes. Naruto shot up out of his seat like he'd been electrocuted, both fists in the air. Sakura Haruno, Naruto's whole face lit up like the Hokage monument at sunrise. Across the room, a pink-haired girl in a modest crimson chipao-style top with high, close sleeves buried her face in her hands and made a sound like a deflating balloon. And Sasuke Uchiha. Sasuke didn't react at all. Naruto's celebration froze mid-fist pump and slowly curdled into something closer to horror. Wait, what? Him? Why do I get stuck with this guy? Behind him, half the girls in class turned around in perfect, choreographed unison to glare murder into the back of Naruto's skull for having the audacity to be upset about being placed with their beloved Sasuke-kun. Sakura, for her part, had gone from despair to quiet, radiant joy in about 4 seconds flat, already mentally redecorating her future with Sasuke's last name. Irika cleared his throat loudly enough to reclaim the room. Teams are balanced based on skill, one top student, one average student, and one who needs the most support. That's how it's always been done, and there it was. Right there, in front of the entire class, said as gently and as matter-of-factly as if he were reading off the weather forecast. The one who needs the most support. Naruto laughed it off out loud, the way he always did, loud and a little too big, elbowing Sasuke and grinning like the comment had bounced right off him. It hadn't. It never did. You want to know something about pain that people don't talk about enough? The kind that sticks isn't always the kind that gets shouted at you. Sometimes it's the kind that gets said so casually, so obviously, that nobody in the room even thinks to soften it, because to them, it isn't an insult. It's just a fact. Naruto Uzumaki, the dead last. Everyone knew it. Even the people who liked him knew it. Even Irika, who loved him like a little brother, said it like it was just true. Naruto had spent his whole life being underestimated. He was getting very, very good at pretending it didn't matter. He didn't know yet that somewhere behind his own eyes, something ancient was about to prove every single one of them wrong. The rest of that day went more or less the way you'd expect if you already know this story. Introductions after lunch, waiting alone in the classroom for a sensei who was suspiciously late, Sakura simmering with barely restrained excitement every time Sasuke so much as breathed near her, and Naruto rigging an eraser into the top of the door because if there was one thing the world had taught him, it was that adults deserved to be tested before you trusted them. The eraser found its mark on one Kakashi Hatake, Jonin, who took the hit without so much as blinking and then calmly told his brand new team that his first impression of them was that he hated them, before sending them up to the roof. Alright, Kakashi said, sitting across from the three of them on the low wall, his visible eye curved into something that might have been amusement. Let's start with introductions. Names, likes, dislikes, dreams for the future. Something like that. Sakura raised her hand immediately. Why don't you go first, sensei? So we know how to do it. Me? Kakashi tilted his head, and somehow the motion communicated genuine surprise. Alright. I'm Kakashi Hatake. I have lots of hobbies. I don't feel like telling you my likes and dislikes. And as for dreams for the future, he shrugged, never really thought about it. 3 genin stared at him with matching expressions of profound betrayal. All he told us was his name, Sakura whispered, horrified. Kakashi, entirely unbothered, pointed at Naruto. You. Blondie. Go. Naruto sat up straighter, that familiar grin spreading across his face. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I like ramen, especially the kind Tuchi-san makes at Ichiraku. The chicken swapped for beef now cause of some new supplier deal, but it's still the best in the world. And I like the 3 seconds after the noodles finish cooking, right before you eat them. I dislike the 3 minutes you have to wait for the water to boil. My dream, and here his voice cracked just slightly louder, just slightly more defiant, like he was daring the sky itself to disagree with him, is to become Hokage. And then everyone in this whole village is gonna have to look at me and admit I'm not just some nobody anymore. Kakashi's eye lingered on him for half a second longer than it needed to. Interesting, he said, and didn't elaborate. Sasuke went next, in the clipped, joyless tone of someone reciting a grocery list. Likes, nothing in particular. Dislikes, a great many things. Dream, no, not a dream, an ambition, was to restore his clan and to kill a certain man. The temperature on that rooftop seemed to drop about 10 degrees when he said it. Sakura's turn came and went in a blur of stammered adoration that made absolutely everyone uncomfortable except Sakura herself. Kakashi clapped his hands together once the silence had stretched long enough to become its own small tragedy. Right. Well, you're all pretty unique, and quite interesting in your own ways. He stood, tucking his hands into his pockets. Tomorrow we begin our first task as a team. I should warn you, out of the 27 graduates this year, only 9 will actually become genin. The rest will be sent back to the academy. This exercise has a 66% failure rate. He let that land, watched 3 young faces go pale in 3 slightly different ways, and then added, cheerfully, don't eat breakfast. You'll throw up. And then he was gone in a puff of smoke, and Team 7, officially assembled but not remotely a team yet, sat on that rooftop in silence, each of them quietly recalculating everything they thought they knew about what tomorrow was going to look like. You know what happens next if you've seen this story before: the bell test, the lesson about teamwork buried underneath Kakashi's theatrics, Sasuke and Sakura and even Naruto slowly, grudgingly starting to understand that none of them were going to make it anywhere alone. I'm not going to walk you through every beat of it, because that's not really why you're here. You're here for the eyes. So let's fast forward. Weeks of D-rank missions, pulling weeds, chasing a cat that seemed to have personally dedicated its life to escaping capture, painting fences, walking dogs for elderly clients who complained the entire time. Naruto's patience, never exactly a bottomless well to begin with, was evaporating fast. Team 7 was slowly becoming an actual team in the small, unglamorous ways that matter, inside jokes forming, Sakura learning to see Naruto as more than background noise, Sasuke's icy indifference thawing by maybe 1 degree. But the missions themselves were driving Naruto up the wall, and every few nights the dream came back. It got clearer each time. He started to notice details he hadn't before, a shape in the mist, tall and still, like a statue standing sentry over water that had no business being that calm. The pressure of being watched sharpened into something almost like a question being asked of him, over and over, in a language made of feeling instead of words. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? He never had an answer. He always woke up before he could give one. One night, after a particularly frustrating D-rank chasing the same runaway cat for the 3rd time that month, Naruto sat on the edge of his bed rubbing his eyes and muttered out loud to the empty apartment. Ready for what, though? Silence answered him. Then, faint and distant, like it was coming from somewhere very far underneath his own thoughts, Kurama's voice rumbled awake for just a moment. That's not me you're hearing, brat. Naruto sat bolt upright. What? What do you mean it's not you? Who else would it be? But the fox, cryptic even on its best days, and clearly displeased about something it wasn't ready to explain, said nothing else, and retreated back into whatever dark corner of Naruto's mind it liked to sulk in, leaving him wide awake at 2 in the morning with more questions than he'd started with and absolutely nobody to ask them to. If you're a long-time member of this community, you already know this is the part where things start to shift. And if you're new, welcome, seriously, welcome, because you're about to watch this story's first real domino fall. The next morning, Team 7 gathered at the mission assignment desk expecting another D-rank. Naruto, running on almost no sleep and a stomach full of nervous energy he couldn't name, was in exactly the wrong mood to sit quietly through it. The 3rd Hokage, seated behind his desk with a pipe unlit in one hand, he'd mostly given it up years ago. These days it was more habit than anything, tea replacing the stronger stuff he used to favor in his younger years, read out the day's options. Weed pulling. Babysitting. Shopping errands for an elderly couple 2 streets over. Naruto exploded. No way. Come on, old man, give us a real mission. We've been doing this chores stuff for weeks and I'm sick of it. I want to do something that actually matters. Iruka, standing beside the Hokage's desk, immediately launched into a lecture about respect and about how D-rank missions built foundational skills, but Naruto talked right over him, arms flailing. insisting that he didn't sign up to be a ninja to walk old ladies' dogs, he signed up to protect people, to matter, to prove. He stopped himself before the rest of that sentence came out. To prove I'm not what everyone thinks I am. Hiruzen watched him with the particular patience of a man who had known this boy his entire life and understood exactly what was driving that outburst, even if Naruto himself didn't fully understand it yet. He set his pipe down. Very well, the old Hokage said, and something in his tone made even Kakashi glance up with mild surprise. There is a C-rank request that just came in. Escort and bodyguard duty for a client traveling to the land of waves. The mood in the room flipped instantly. Naruto's whole face transformed. A real mission? Yes. See, I told you I was ready. The client was shown in, an older man, unshaven, a bottle-shaped satchel of tea leaves slung over one shoulder instead of the harder stuff a man like him might have once preferred, carrying the tired, weathered look of someone who'd been putting off asking for help for far too long, and was only now admitting he had no other choice. He introduced himself as Tazuna, a bridge builder from the land of waves, and the moment he laid eyes on his supposed protection detail, his expression soured considerably. This is a joke, right? Tazuna said, looking Team 7 up and down, lingering with particular skepticism on Naruto. This whiskered brat is supposed to protect me? He looks like he'd get himself killed carrying my luggage. Naruto's eye twitched. Sakura had to physically grab the back of his jacket to stop him from launching across the room. Kakashi, unbothered as ever, assured Tazuna that he'd be personally overseeing the mission, that a Jonin escort more than accounted for any risk on what should be a straightforward C-rank. Tazuna grumbled but accepted it, and just like that, it was decided. Team 7 would leave for the land of waves the next morning. If you know this arc, you know exactly what's coming. But even if you've seen the original 100 times, I promise you, this version has a surprise waiting in the mist that the canon story never had. Naruto barely slept that night, and for once it wasn't the dream keeping him up. It was excitement, pure and simple, the kind that made a 12-year-old feel 10 feet tall. His first real mission, something with actual stakes. Something that might finally start to chip away at the mountain of doubt the entire village had built around him since before he could walk. He packed that morning with the manic energy of someone convinced this trip was going to change everything. He had no idea how right he was. The four of them, Kakashi, Sasuke, Sakura, and Naruto, met Tazuna at the village gates just after sunrise and set off down the long road that would eventually lead to the land of waves. The first stretch of the journey was almost peaceful. Sakura pestered Kakashi with questions about the difference between the land of fire and other countries. Sasuke walked in his usual practiced silence, eyes scanning the treeline out of habit more than suspicion. Naruto talked enough for all three of them, filling the quiet with commentary about everything from the shape of the clouds to his ongoing, deeply personal grudge against the specific cat from 3 weeks ago. And Tazuna, walking slightly ahead of the group with his satchel over one shoulder, kept glancing back at them with an expression that was doing its absolute best not to look nervous. Kakashi noticed. Of course he noticed. But he said nothing, letting the road roll on beneath their feet, letting the morning stretch into afternoon. It was on that road, a few hours out from the village, past the stretch where the trees thickened and the light dimmed under the canopy, that Naruto's stomach did something strange. Not nausea. Not nerves. Something else. A tightness behind his eyes, faint and unfamiliar, like the pressure right before a sneeze, except it lived somewhere deeper than his sinuses. He blinked hard, rubbed at his face, and told himself it was just tiredness catching up with him. You all right? Sakura asked, noticing him lag half a step. Fine. Great. Never better. Naruto said, too fast, too loud, and picked up his pace to walk beside her again, pushing the strange feeling down and burying it under enthusiasm the way he buried everything uncomfortable. They kept walking. The trees kept thickening. And somewhere up ahead, past a bend in the road where a puddle sat perfectly still despite there having been no rain for days, something was waiting for them that had absolutely nothing to do with strange dreams or ringed eyes. At least, not yet. Kakashi saw the puddle first. He didn't react outwardly. A career's worth of experience had trained that reflex out of him. But his gaze lingered on it for half a second too long as they passed. No rain in days. Clear skies for the entire journey. And yet there it sat, small and still and undeniably out of place, tucked innocently at the base of a tree just off the road. He said nothing. He kept walking. But something in the back of his mind had already started counting down. It didn't take long. They erupted from the puddle in a spray of water and shredded illusion. 2 figures in matching gauntlets, a heavy studded chain strung between their wrists, moving fast and low and precise. The kind of coordinated strike meant for exactly one purpose: killing the target before anyone could react. Kakashi let them. That's the part that always gets people the first time they watch this story unfold. Their sensei, the legendary copy ninja, stood there and let 2 Mist-Nin wrap a spiked chain around him. Let them yank it tight, let his body burst apart into a shower of chopped and shredded nothing. Log. Substitution. He'd known they were coming from the moment he saw that puddle, and he'd let his own team watch it happen so they'd understand, in the rawest possible terms, exactly how outmatched a genin team could be against real killers. But he hadn't accounted for one small variable. He was too far to intercept the follow-up strike. The chain snapped free from around the ruined log, and the 2 attackers, the Demon Brothers, the kind of missing nin whose reputations preceded them in every bingo book from here to the border, didn't hesitate. They redirected instantly, chain looping wide, aiming not for Tazuna, not for Sasuke's blade already half-drawn, but for the loudest, smallest, most obviously unguarded target in the group, Naruto. Everything slowed down. He'd tell you later, much later, once he understood what had actually happened, that in that half-second, he wasn't scared exactly. There wasn't time to be scared. There was just a flare of pure, blinding awareness, a sense that the chain was going to close around him whether he liked it or not, and underneath that awareness, something ancient and patient finally answered the question it had been asking him in his dreams for 3 nights running. Are you ready? His eyes burned. Not painfully, not exactly, but with a pressure that bloomed outward from somewhere behind his pupils, spreading like ripples across still water. For one single, frozen heartbeat, the whole world sharpened into impossible clarity. He could see the chain's exact trajectory. He could see the tension in the attacker's wrist, the micro-adjustment of his grip, the precise fraction of a second before the strike would connect. He could see it the way you see something you've already watched happen 100 times before, not a prediction so much as a certainty. He moved. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't trained. It was raw animal reflex layered over something that felt, for just an instant, like it belonged to someone infinitely older and calmer than a 12-year-old genin on his first C-rank mission, and it was enough. He twisted out of the chain's path by a margin so narrow Sakura would swear afterward she heard the metal links brush against his jacket, and came up already moving toward the attacker instead of away from him. Fist cocked, something blue and strange flickering at the edges of his vision like heat haze. Kakashi's head snapped toward him. He saw it. Just for a moment, just a flicker, there and gone before anyone else could register it. Naruto's eyes weren't the bright, ordinary blue they'd always been. They were rippling. Concentric rings, pale blue and unmistakably not human, staring out from a 12-year-old's face for exactly as long as it took him to blink. And then they were gone, and Naruto's fist connected solidly with the attacker's jaw, sending him stumbling back with a strength that seemed, just slightly, more than a genin 3 weeks out of the academy should have been able to generate, and the moment shattered into ordinary chaos again. Sasuke moved. Kakashi moved. The second demon brother lunged for Tazuna and was intercepted, restrained, the fight over almost as quickly as it had begun, the whole encounter lasting under a minute from puddle to pinned attacker. Naruto stood in the middle of it, breathing hard, staring at his own hands like he didn't quite recognize them. Whoa, he said, mostly to himself. What was that? Nobody answered him right away. Sakura was checking on Tazuna. Sasuke was helping Kakashi bind the second attacker. And Kakashi was watching Naruto with an expression the boy had never once seen on his sensei's face before. It wasn't annoyance. It wasn't even surprise, not exactly. It was the look of a man very carefully, very deliberately, deciding not to say something out loud in front of witnesses. They made camp that night in a small clearing off the road, the mission technically continuing despite the ambush. Kakashi had confirmed under quiet questioning that the demon brothers had been hired specifically to kill Tazuna, which meant this was no longer the simple C-rank it had been billed as, and that Tazuna himself had some serious explaining to do about exactly who wanted him dead, and why. But that conversation would come later. Right now, with the fire crackling low and Sasuke and Sakura settling in for the watch rotation, Kakashi found a quiet moment to pull Naruto aside, just out of earshot of the others. "Your eyes," Kakashi said, without preamble, once they were far enough from the fire that the words wouldn't carry. "During the fight. Did you notice anything strange?" Naruto's grin faltered. "I mean, I saw the chain coming before it should have been possible to see it. It was weird. Like everything got really clear for a second." He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Why? Did something happen?" Kakashi studied him for a long moment, the kind of long, evaluating look that made Naruto distinctly uncomfortable, like he was being read rather than looked at. "Your eyes changed," Kakashi said finally, choosing his words with obvious care. "For about a second. I've seen a lot of bloodlines in my time, Naruto. What I saw wasn't any of them." Naruto's stomach dropped. What did it look like?" "Rings," Kakashi said. "Blue rings. Around your pupils." He watched Naruto's face carefully as he said it, watched the color drain out of it, watched the boy's hand come up unconsciously to touch his own eyelid like he could feel the difference even now. "Does that mean anything to you?" For a long moment, Naruto said nothing at all. Because it did mean something to him. It meant the dream, the mist, the still gray water and the reflection that wasn't his reflection, the eyes that weren't the right shade of blue. It meant 3 sleepless nights of a question he never had an answer for, finally, impossibly, getting answered in the worst, or maybe the best, way imaginable. "I don't know what it is," Naruto admitted quietly, and for once there was no bravado in his voice at all, just something small and a little bit scared. "But I've been dreaming about it. For a few nights now, eyes like that. I didn't tell anyone because I figured it was just, I don't know. A weird dream." Kakashi was quiet for a moment, processing that, his single visible eye unreadable in the firelight. "We'll talk more when we're back in the village," he said eventually. "For now, don't mention this to Sakura or Sasuke. Not until we understand what it actually is." He paused. "And Naruto, if it happens again, don't fight it. Whatever this is, it moved fast enough to save your life tonight. That's worth paying attention to." Naruto nodded slowly, still turning the whole conversation over in his head like a puzzle piece that didn't fit any picture he recognized. He didn't sleep well that night either. But this time, when the dream came, the mist, the water, the tall still shape watching him from somewhere he couldn't quite see, the question had changed. It wasn't "Are you ready?" anymore. It was something closer to "Good. Now we begin." The rest of the journey to the land of waves passed in a strange, charged quiet. Tazuna, cornered by an increasingly suspicious Kakashi, finally admitted the truth, that a man named Gato, a shipping magnate with a stranglehold on the land of waves economy, and no shortage of hired killers on his payroll, wanted him dead to stop the bridge he was building, a bridge that represented the one hope his impoverished country had of breaking Gato's grip for good. Kakashi weighed the ethics of continuing a mission that had clearly escalated well past its original rank, considered the exhausted, guilt-ridden old man standing in front of him, and, in the end, the way he always would, decided the team would see it through. Naruto barely registered any of it. His mind kept drifting back to those blue rings, to the pressure behind his eyes, to a voice that wasn't Kurama's asking him questions in a place that felt more real every time he closed his eyes. By the time they reached the shoreline where a small boat waited to ferry them across to the land of waves under cover of a heavy, unnatural mist, Naruto had almost managed to convince himself that whatever had happened on that road was a one-time thing. Adrenaline. A trick of the light. Nothing more. The boat cut silently through water so still it looked like glass, mist curling thick around them in a way that swallowed sound and blurred every shape more than 50 feet away into pale gray nothing. It looked, Naruto realized with a slow chill crawling up his spine, exactly like his dream. "Hey," he whispered to Sasuke, sitting beside him in the boat. "Doesn't this seem familiar to you?" Sasuke didn't answer, eyes fixed on the wall of mist ahead of them with the particular stillness of someone whose instincts had just started screaming at him for reasons he couldn't yet articulate. Up at the front of the boat, Kakashi's single visible eye had narrowed, scanning the fog with the focused intensity of a man who had survived far too many ambushes to ever fully relax, mist or no mist. The boat glided forward. The silence stretched. And somewhere out there, cloaked in gray and waiting with the patience of a predator who had done this 100 times before, a man with a massive cleaver-like blade slung across his back stood perfectly still on the water's surface, watching the small boat approach through mist he had personally, deliberately conjured. He'd heard whispers. Whispers about the bridge builder's escort. Whispers, even, about something strange traveling with them, a flicker of a bloodline nobody in the land of waves had a name for. Zabuza Momochi smiled behind the bandages wrapped across the lower half of his face, hefted his blade off his shoulder, and waited for the boat to get just a little bit closer. Have you ever had that feeling, right before something terrible happens, where the world just goes quiet? Not peaceful quiet. Wrong quiet. The kind where your body knows something your brain hasn't caught up to yet. That's the silence that fell over the boat the second Kakashi Hataki's hand shot up, signaling everyone to stop moving. Welcome back. Last time, Team 7 was gliding through an unnaturally thick mist on their way into the land of waves, completely unaware that a missing meme with a reputation for silent killing was standing on the water ahead of them, waiting. If you haven't watched Chapter 1 yet, go check it out first, because today things are about to get very, very real for Naruto Uzumaki. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell on, because this is the chapter where everything changes. Let's get into it. Get down, Kakashi said low and flat, and the calm in his voice was somehow more alarming than if he'd shouted. The boatman, a wiry local who'd ferried them out under cover of the fog, dropped his oar and flattened himself against the hull without asking a single question. The kind of instant obedience that told you everything you needed to know about how much authority radiated off Kakashi even when he wasn't trying. Sakura grabbed Tazuna's sleeve and pulled him down too. Sasuke's hand had already drifted to the kunai pouch at his hip. Naruto didn't move. He wasn't being brave. He wasn't frozen in fear either. It was something stranger than either of those things, a prickling awareness climbing up the back of his neck. The same tightness behind his eyes he'd felt right before the chain on the road, except bigger this time. Heavier, like standing at the edge of a pool and feeling the water pull at your ankles before you've even stepped in. Something's here, he thought. Something's watching us. Naruto. Kakashi's voice, sharp now. Get down, he dropped, more out of reflex than obedience, just as a shape detached itself from the mist ahead of them. Not running across the water's surface so much as simply appearing there, like the fog itself had decided to solidify into a person. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Bandages wrapped across the lower half of a face that left only a pair of narrow, predator-still eyes visible above them. A massive blade, wider than a person and shaped like a huge cleaver, rested easily across one shoulder, as if it weighed nothing at all. Well, the man said, voice muffled but unmistakably amused. The copy ninja Kakashi. I'd heard rumors you were escorting the bridge builder. I have to say, I didn't expect the honor of dealing with you personally. Kakashi's posture shifted, subtle but unmistakable, weight settling low, hand drifting toward his forehead protector, toward the eye it had always kept covered. Zabuza Momochi, he said, demon of the hidden mist. Gato really did hire the best, didn't he? He hired the available, Zabuza corrected. And there was something almost bored in the way he said it, like violence was simply the errand he'd been sent to run. Hand over the old man, and I'll let the children go home in one piece. I've got no interest in killing Genin today. Not an option, Kakashi said simply, and reached up to push his headband off his left eye. What lay underneath made Sakura gasp out loud, a scarred, closed lid that opened to reveal an eye entirely unlike the one beside it. A deep red iris marked with 3 black tomos circling the pupil like the hands of some terrible clock. Sharingan. Naruto had heard whispers about it. Sasuke's clan eye, the one he never talked about, the one that was supposedly the whole reason the Uchiha were considered one of Konoha's most dangerous bloodlines even after most of them were gone. He hadn't known Kakashi had one too, judging by the way Sasuke's jaw tightened beside him, watching his sensei reveal it so casually. He certainly hadn't known Kakashi had one either. Zabuza went very still. So the rumors were true. The man who copied 1,000 jutsu. He rolled his shoulders, settling his grip on the massive blade. This just got a lot more interesting. He vanished. Not slow, not telegraphed, simply gone and then somewhere else. A burst of speed that even Kakashi's Sharingan seemed to struggle tracking for the first half-second. He reappeared standing on the water's surface a stone's throw from the boat, mist curling thicker around him by the moment, gathering like it was answering some silent command. Hidden mist jutsu, Kakashi said quietly, eye narrowing. He's expanding it. Everyone stay close. Don't wander from the boat. The fog thickened around them with unnerving speed, swallowing the shoreline, swallowing the water more than a few feet out, swallowing even the shape of Zabuza himself until there was nothing left but gray in every direction and the distant, disembodied sound of a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. 8 points, Zabuza's voice said, low and almost conversational, drifting through the mist like it was being carried on the fog itself. Throat. Lungs. Liver. Kidneys. Spine. Jugular vein. Subclavian artery. Heart. Which one do you think I'll pick first, copy ninja? Sakura pressed herself against Tazuna, breathing fast. Sasuke had gone rigid, sweat beating at his temple despite the cold, his hand white-knuckled around a kunai he hadn't drawn a second too soon. And Naruto felt that pressure behind his eyes climb another notch, sharp enough now that it almost hurt, like something was pushing from the inside trying to get out. Not yet, he thought, fighting it down out of pure instinct, some part of him terrified that if his eyes changed again in front of everyone, in the middle of a real fight against a real enemy, he wouldn't understand what was happening any more than he had the first time. Not yet, Kakashi moved first. A surge of chakra, a wall of killing intent thrown back at Zabuza's own with enough force that Naruto actually felt it pass through his own body like cold water, and for one breathless moment the mist seemed to waver, and Naruto's overloaded senses caught something in it. A flicker of shape and motion off to their left, closing fast. Sensei, behind! His warning came half a second too late and about a full second unnecessary, because Kakashi had already spun to intercept the water clone that lunged from the fog, blade catching blade in a shower of sparks. But it bought them something, a beat of clarity, Zabuza's clone dissolving back into water under a well-placed kunai, the real Zabuza's presence pulling back into the mist to reassess. TCH, Zabuza's voice muttered, somewhere unseen. Fast for a genin. Notice that before you should have. Kakashi didn't answer. He was already moving, positioning himself between the boat and the mist, eye scanning constantly, and Naruto realized with a lurch that his sensei, even with the Sharingan, even with all his experience, was being pushed onto the defensive by an opponent they couldn't fully see. This is bad, Naruto thought. This is really bad. The fight that followed was one of the longest few minutes of Naruto's life. Zabuza struck from the mist again and again, always retreating before Kakashi could land a decisive blow, always circling, testing, probing for the weakness he clearly believed had to be there. Kakashi met every strike, every clone, every feint with the calm precision of a man who had survived 1,000 encounters exactly like this one. But calm precision wasn't the same as winning, and Naruto could see, even without any special insight, that his sensei was being worn down. It was during one particular exchange, Zabuza's clone driving Kakashi back toward the boat with a flurry of strikes, forcing him to give ground he clearly didn't want to give, that everything went wrong at once. The real Zabuza had been waiting for exactly that moment. He erupted from the water directly beside the boat, blade already swinging in a wide arc aimed not at Kakashi, who was occupied, and not at Tazuna, who was too well guarded, but at the boatman, the unassuming local who'd ferried them here, the softest target available, the one whose death would sow chaos and buy Zabuza the half-second of confusion he needed to finish the real job. Sasuke saw it and moved to intercept, too far away, too slow. Sakura screamed. And Naruto, who had spent the entire fight fighting down the pressure behind his eyes, who had told himself not yet over and over like a promise he was terrified of breaking, felt the promise shatter. He didn't decide to move. There wasn't time to decide anything. One moment he was frozen at the edge of the boat, and the next his whole body was simply acting, chakra flooding through him in a way that felt less like his own strength and more like something enormous had reached down and briefly lent him a fraction of its own, and the world went sharp and slow and impossibly clear all at once. the exact arc of the blade, the exact angle it would need to travel to reach the boatman's chest, the exact half-second window in which a body could physically intercept that path and survive it. He threw himself between the blade and the boatman. Time snapped back to normal speed at the worst possible moment. The massive cleaver already descending, already too close to redirect. And for one horrible frozen instant Naruto understood with total clarity that he'd made a terrible miscalculation, that he was 12 years old and made of nothing but stubbornness and bad decisions, and that this particular bad decision was about to get him killed. The blade never landed. It stopped, actually stopped, a hair's breadth from Naruto's shoulder, arrested mid-swing like it had struck something invisible and immovable, and Zabuza himself staggered back half a step with a grunt of genuine surprise, shaking out his sword arm like he'd just slammed it into a stone wall. What? Zabuza started. Naruto didn't hear the rest. He was staring up at the missing knee, chest, heaving, and for the second time in 2 days he felt that strange pressure bloom fully open behind his eyes. Except this time there was no half-second flicker, no fading back to normal before anyone could really see it. This time it held. Sakura's scream cut off into stunned silence. Sasuke froze mid-motion. Even Kakashi, backing away from the water clone he just dispatched, turned toward the boat with his single Sharingan eye going wide. Naruto Uzumaki's eyes had changed completely. The blue was gone, swallowed by a pale, rippling violet blue. Pupils vanished entirely, replaced by concentric rings radiating outward from the center like something had dropped a stone into perfectly still water and frozen the ripples in place. For a moment, nobody moved. Even Zabubi, hardened, unshakable Zabuza, a man whose bingo book entry included the phrase approach with extreme caution, took an actual step back, sword lowering fractionally, his narrow eyes narrowing further in something that looked disturbingly close to recognition. That eye, he said slowly. That's not possible. What? Sakura managed, voice cracking. What is that? Naruto, what's happening to your eyes? Naruto didn't answer. He couldn't have, even if he'd wanted to. His own mind was reeling, flooded with sensation he had no frame of reference for. He could feel the boat's chakra signature. What didn't have chakra? That made no sense. But he could feel the shape of it anyway, the mass and weight of it, the way he could feel Sakura's frightened heartbeat, and Sasuke's coiled tension and Tazuna's terror, all of it pressing in on him at once from every direction like the world had suddenly grown a second, invisible layer he'd never known was there. And underneath all of it, quiet and vast and endlessly patient, he could feel Zabuza, every muscle in the man's body, every fraction of intent behind his next move, laid out with a clarity that should have been impossible. I can see him, Naruto realized, distantly, disbelieving. I can see all of him. Not just where he is. What he's about to do. Zabuza recovered his composure fast, faster than his obvious unease should have allowed, and settled back into a ready stance, blade coming back up. Whatever that is, he said, voice hardening, it's not going to save you twice. He lunged. It was fast, faster than the strike he'd used on the boatman, faster than anything Naruto had ever personally witnessed in his short life, and under any other circumstances it probably would have ended the fight right there. But Naruto's borrowed clarity held, and this time he wasn't reacting on blind instinct. He saw it coming, saw the blade's trajectory laid out ahead of time like a line drawn on a map, and some deep, primal certainty told him exactly what to do about it, even though no part of his training had ever covered anything like this. He raised one hand. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't dodge. He simply held his palm out toward the incoming blade, some wordless instinct guiding the motion, and the moment the massive cleaver's edge would have connected, something pushed back against it, not visible, not really, just a distortion in the air itself, like heat haze given weight and purpose, and Zabuza's strike deflected clean off course, sword biting into the boat's hull instead of Naruto's collarbone, sending up a shower of splinters. Zabuza's eyes went wide over his bandages. He wrenched the blade free and retreated several full steps, putting real distance between himself and the strange 12-year-old with rippling blue eyes for the first time since the fight had started. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered, and this time there was no mockery in it at all, just genuine, unnerved calculation. Kakashi seized the opening. He closed the distance in an instant, Sharingan blazing, forcing Zabuza onto full defense with a combination that finally finally started to push the missing Nin backward instead of the other way around. The fight surged away from the boat, back out over open water, sword and kunai flashing through curtains of mist that were finally, slowly, starting to thin. And Naruto stood frozen at the edge of the boat, hands still raised, staring at his own palm like it belonged to someone else, his borrowed clarity beginning to fade at the edges, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that hit him all at once, like his body had spent something it desperately needed back. Naruto, Sakura said, very carefully, like she was talking to something that might bolt. Your eyes. They're still. I know, he said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. I can feel it. He caught his own reflection in the water at the boat's edge, just for a second, just long enough, and saw exactly what everyone else was seeing. Pale rippling rings where his pupils should have been. The same eyes from his dream. The same eyes from the still gray water that wasn't quite Konoha. It's real, he thought, something between terror and disbelief, and underneath both of those, a small, fierce spark of something that felt almost like hope. Whatever this is. It's real. Out on the water, the fight between Kakashi and Zabuza had entered its final, decisive stage. Kakashi's Sharingan let him read Zabuza's movements a fraction ahead of when they landed, and slowly, inexorably, that fraction of a second was adding up. Zabuza was bleeding from a shallow cut along one arm. His breathing had gone ragged. And when Kakashi finally trapped him in a water prison technique, copied, like everything else, from an opponent who'd probably regretted teaching it to him, it looked, for one triumphant moment, like the fight was over. It wasn't. Two Senbon needles hissed out of the treeline and buried themselves in Zabuza's neck with lethal precision, and the missing Nin crumpled instantly, water prison collapsing along with him. A masked figure dropped from the branches a moment later, thanking Kakashi politely for weakening the target enough to make the kill possible, claiming Zabuza's body as a trophy, and vanishing back into the trees before anyone could react. Hunter Nin. Standard protocol. Kakashi lowered his hands slowly, chakra exhaustion from the Sharingan finally catching up to him all at once, and Naruto watched from the boat as his sensei swayed once and then simply folded, unconscious before he even hit the ground. Kakashi-sensei. The next several minutes dissolved into chaos, getting Kakashi onto solid ground, checking his pulse with trembling hands, Tazuna insisting his home wasn't far and that they needed to move him there immediately. Naruto helped carry his sensei's weight without really registering that he was doing it, his mind still half lost in the aftershock of whatever had just happened to his eyes, which had finally, mercifully, faded back to their ordinary blue somewhere in the confusion. By the time they reached Tazuna's modest house on the outskirts of a fishing village that had clearly seen better days, Kakashi was stirring but nowhere near recovered, and Naruto was running on fumes so thin he could barely feel his own legs. He collapsed onto a spare futon the moment Tazuna's daughter, a quiet, serious woman named Tsunami, dressed modestly in a long-sleeved indigo robe that covered her fully from wrist to ankle, showed him where he could rest, and was asleep before his head fully hit the pillow. He dreamed about the mist again, but this time, the tall still shape in the water wasn't just watching him from a distance. This time, for the first time, it felt close enough to almost, make out a face. Good, the pressure seemed to say, wordless and enormous and strangely, impossibly warm underneath all that vastness. You held the door open. That's the hardest part. What are you? Naruto tried to ask, in the dream, in the only language dreams seemed to allow. What's happening to me? You'll understand soon enough, the presence answered. For now, rest. You'll need your strength. This is only the beginning, Naruto Uzumaki. He woke to late afternoon light slanting through an unfamiliar window, and the low murmur of voices from the next room. For a moment he just lay there, running his hands over his own face like he was checking to make sure everything was still where it should be, before the memories of the day before came flooding back all at once. The mist, the blade stopping inches from his shoulder, the reflection in the water that had been his own eyes and yet completely unrecognizable. He sat up slowly, joints aching in a way he didn't fully understand. Chakra exhaustion, he'd guess later, though at the time it just felt like his whole body had run a marathon without his permission, and followed the voices out into the main room, where Kakashi sat propped against the wall, pale but conscious, sipping a cup of tea Tsunami had prepared for him. Can't be certain, Kakashi was saying quietly, but I've never seen anything like it. Not in any bingo book. Not in any clan registry I've ever studied. You said the eyes had rings, came Tazuna's gruff voice, curious despite himself. Like the old stories about. He cut himself off the moment he noticed Naruto standing in the doorway, and the whole room went a little too quiet, a little too fast. The specific kind of silence that told Naruto immediately that they'd been talking about him. Hey, Naruto said, suddenly self-conscious, rubbing the back of his neck. You guys are talking about me, huh? Kakashi set down his tea. Sit down, Naruto. We need to talk about what happened yesterday. Naruto sat, cross-legged on the floor, feeling 12 years old in a way he usually managed to avoid feeling, no matter how much of a troublemaker he acted like at the academy. Across the room, he noticed Sasuke leaning against the far wall, arms crossed, watching him with an expression that was harder to read than usual, not hostile, exactly. Calculating. Sakura sat beside him, worry written plainly across her face. Your eyes changed completely yesterday, Kakashi said, without preamble, the way he always seemed to prefer it. Not a flicker this time. It held for several minutes, and from what I could see even mid-fight, it gave you some kind of reactive defensive ability. You deflected Zabuza's strike without any jutsu I recognize, without hand seals, without anything I could identify as a known technique. I don't know how I did it, Naruto admitted. It just happened. Like my body knew what to do even though I didn't. You mentioned dreams, Kakashi said. Before we left the village. Do you remember anything more specific about them now? Anything that's changed since the eyes activated fully? Naruto hesitated, but there wasn't really any point in hiding it anymore, not after what everyone had just watched him do. So he told them, haltingly at first, then more steadily as the words came easier, about the mist, the still water, the reflection with the wrong eyes, the pressure of being watched by something patient and enormous and, as of last night, apparently not unfriendly. He told them about the voice that wasn't Kurama's, about the question that had finally gotten an answer, about good. You held the door open and this is only the beginning. By the time he finished, the room was dead silent. That's... Sakura started, and trailed off, clearly not sure how to finish the sentence. A bloodline, Kakashi said slowly, thinking it through out loud. But not one inherited the normal way. Something that was already inside you, waiting to activate. His visible eye flicked briefly toward Naruto's midsection, toward the seal none of them ever talked about directly, but that Kakashi, at least, clearly knew about in full. It's not impossible that whatever this is has something to do with your bloodline. The Uzumaki clan had abilities that went far beyond what most people know about. Chakra chains, extraordinary life force reserves. Techniques that mainstream shinobi villages never fully understood, because Uzumaki fell before that knowledge could really spread. You think this is an Uzumaki thing? Naruto asked, something cautiously hopeful creeping into his voice despite everything. He didn't know much about his mother's side of the family, barely anything at all, if he was honest, and the idea that this strange, frightening power might be a piece of that missing history hit him harder than he expected. I don't know, Kakashi said honestly. I'm not an expert on dojutsu that don't already have a name. But I know someone who might be able to help us figure it out. He met Naruto's eyes, serious in a way that cut through all his usual laziness. When we get back to Konoha, we're going straight to the Hokage. This isn't something we handle on our own, understand? Whatever's happening to you, it's bigger than a C-rank mission gone sideways. Naruto nodded slowly. Part of him wanted to argue, some old, stubborn instinct that hated the idea of anyone else deciding what happened to his body, his eyes, his secret. But a bigger part of him, a part that had felt the sheer overwhelming scale of whatever he'd tapped into yesterday, knew Kakashi was right. This wasn't something he could just figure out on his own with willpower and stubbornness the way he'd figured out most things in his life so far. Okay, he said quietly. We'll talk to the old man when we get back. Good, Kakashi said, and allowed himself the faintest, tired smile. For now, though, we have a bigger problem. Zabuza's body was taken by a hunter Nin, but something about that retrieval bothered me the whole way here. What do you mean? Sasuke asked, speaking for the first time since Naruto had entered the room, his voice sharp with the particular focus he reserved for things that actually interested him. Hunter Nin are supposed to dispose of missing Nin bodies on the spot, to prevent their techniques from being studied or stolen, Kakashi said. That one took the body away intact instead, and the senbon used weren't placed anywhere near as lethally as they should have been for a genuine kill. The room went quiet again, this time for an entirely different reason. You think he's still alive, Tazuna said slowly. I think, Kakashi said, that we should all prepare for the possibility that Zabuza Momochi is going to come back. And next time, he's going to come back with a plan for dealing with whatever it is Naruto did to stop his sword. Outside, the sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon over the land of waves, painting the sky in long streaks of orange and violet, and somewhere out past the edge of the village, in a hidden camp deep in the surrounding forest, a masked figure gently laid an unconscious but very much alive Zabuza Momochi down onto a bed of moss, already beginning the slow, careful work of drawing the senbon needles back out one by one. That night, back in Konoha, half a country away, in a quiet office lit by a single lamp, the third Hokage sat awake far later than usual, an old, weathered scroll spread out across his desk, its edges brittle with age, its ink faded almost to illegibility in places. He'd pulled it from the deepest archive under the Hokage Tower earlier that week, on a hunch he hadn't fully been able to explain even to himself, a restricted record salvaged decades ago from the ruins of a village that no longer existed, written in a hand he didn't recognize, describing, in fragments, a bloodline that had vanished from the world along with the island nation that once carried it. He'd found it interesting. Historically significant, perhaps. Nothing more than that, at the time. Now, staring down at a single faded illustration on the scroll's final panel, concentric rings radiating outward from a pupilless eye, rendered in ink that had once, judging by the faintest ghost of pigment still clinging to the page, been colored a deep, unmistakable blue, Hiruzen Sarutobi felt an old, familiar chill settle into his bones. He didn't yet know that half a country away, a boy he'd sworn to protect with his own life had just opened his eyes for the very first time. But something told him he was about to find out very soon. A full week passed at Tazuna's house before anyone brought up the eyes again in any serious way, and honestly, Naruto spent most of that week wishing they wouldn't. It wasn't that he minded the questions exactly. It was that he didn't have any answers, and every time Sakura asked, gently at first, then with growing frustration as the days wore on and nothing changed, he had to say some version of I don't know all over again. And each time it chipped a little more at the fragile confidence the whole ordeal had briefly given him. Kakashi, still recovering from the chakra exhaustion of using his Sharingan against Zabuza, spent the first few days mostly resting, propped up in the corner of Tazuna's front room with a book Naruto had never seen him without, orange-covered and clearly not meant for a 12-year-old's eyes based on the one time Sakura had tried to peek at it, and gone bright red before slamming it shut. But even flat on his back recovering, Kakashi's mind hadn't stopped working, and by the third day he'd started running Naruto through small, careful experiments whenever his own strength allowed it. Try to activate it, Kakashi said, for what felt like the 40th time, sitting cross-legged on the porch overlooking Tazuna's modest garden while Naruto stood a few feet away, fists clenched, face screwed up in concentration. I'm trying, Naruto said through gritted teeth. It's not exactly like flexing a muscle, sensei. It just happened. Both times. I didn't do anything, it just showed up when I needed it. That's the problem, Kakashi said, not unkindly. A bloodline you can only access when your life is in immediate danger isn't a bloodline you can rely on. If Zabuza comes back, and I think we should all assume he will, you need more control than my eyes turn on when I'm about to die. Naruto scowled and tried again anyway, screwing his eyes shut, picturing the ripples, the mist, the pressure behind his eyes that had bloomed open twice now without his permission. Nothing happened. He cracked one eye open, checking, and found Kakashi watching him with the same patient, unreadable expression he always wore. Nothing, Naruto admitted, deflating. That's alright, Kakashi said. Most bloodlines don't develop conscious control overnight. Some clan children train for years before they can activate their eyes reliably. We're not going to solve this in a week. But it's worth trying, because if it does activate again mid-fight, I want you at least a little familiar with reaching for it instead of just having it happen to you. It was frustrating work, the kind that gnawed at Naruto's patience in a way that reminded him uncomfortably of every academy class he'd ever failed to sit still through. But there was something different about this frustration. Underneath the annoyance was a small, persistent thread of hope he couldn't quite shake, the sense that whatever this was, it belonged to him in a way almost nothing else in his life ever had. Not borrowed. Not sealed inside him by someone else's choice, the way Kurama had been his. He kept trying, morning and evening, in between the training Kakashi assigned once he'd recovered enough to properly resume overseeing the team. Tree climbing exercises meant to build the kind of fine chakra control that would, in theory, eventually help with everything else too. If you've been following this channel for a while, you already know I love giving these training arcs some room to breathe, so let's slow down here for a bit, because what happens over these next few days matters more than it might seem at first. Kakashi gathered Team 7 into Zuna's garden on the fourth morning and explained the tree climbing exercise the way he always did, deceptively simple on the surface, brutally revealing underneath. Channel exactly the right amount of chakra to your feet, and you could walk straight up the trunk of a tree, defying gravity entirely. Too little, and you'd slide right off. Too much, and the bark would blast apart beneath your feet and send you tumbling to the ground. Most genin take weeks to master this, Kakashi said, hands in his pockets, watching all three of them with mild amusement already dancing behind his visible eye. See how far you get. Sakura, to everyone's genuine surprise, including her own, nailed it almost immediately, chakra control apparently coming naturally to her in a way it hadn't to either of her teammates. She walked halfway up a tall pine on her very first attempt, and stood there beaming down at two stunned boys with an expression of pure, uncomplicated triumph that Naruto, if he was honest with himself, found more than a little bit annoying. Sasuke made it about a third of the way up before losing his footing and skidding back down the bark, expression tightening with the specific frustration of someone who never once in his life been outperformed by someone he considered beneath him, twice in one exercise, no less. Since Sakura had beaten him too, Naruto didn't make it more than a few feet before the bark exploded under him, and sent him crashing flat on his back into the dirt. He tried again. And again. And again, the sun climbing steadily overhead, sweat soaking through his jacket, gouges torn into every tree along the garden's edge from his repeated failures. Too much chakra, always too much, his massive reserves apparently just as difficult to fine-tune as his mysterious new eyes had proven to be. But here's the thing about Naruto Uzumaki that this whole story is really built around, and that you'll see over and over again if you stick with this series. He doesn't know how to quit. Doesn't matter if it's chakra control, doesn't matter if it's a village's worth of people who've written him off since before he could walk. He keeps getting back up, every single time, long after anyone reasonable would have called it a day. By sunset on the fourth day, he was still at it, alone in the garden, running at the same battered pine tree over and over under the darkening sky, when a familiar figure paused nearby, quietly, unannounced, and simply watched him for a while before saying anything. "You're overdoing it," Kakashi said eventually. "I'm gonna get it," Naruto panted, not stopping. "I'm not going up to bed until I make it to the top at least once." "That's admirable," Kakashi said, "and also the reason you keep failing. You're pouring in more chakra out of frustration, which makes the imbalance worse, not better." Naruto slowed, chest heaving, and shot his sensei an exasperated look. "So what am I supposed to do? Just, not try hard?" "Try differently," Kakashi said. "Control isn't about force, Naruto. It never has been. That's true of chakra, and I suspect it's going to end up being true of whatever's happening with your eyes too." He tilted his head slightly. "You've spent your whole life trying to prove yourself through sheer stubbornness and volume. It's worked for you plenty of times. But some things don't respond to being shouted at." Naruto opened his mouth to argue and then, slowly, closed it again, turning the words over. It wasn't the kind of thing he was used to hearing. Most of his life had been exactly what Kakashi described, brute force effort thrown at every obstacle, until something finally gave. The idea that some doors needed a gentler kind of knock was almost foreign to him. He took a breath. Closed his eyes. Tried this time, not to force the chakra to his feet through pure willpower, but to simply feel for the right amount, the way you might feel for the edge of a step in the dark. He made it 4 steps up the trunk before sliding back down. It wasn't the top. It wasn't even close to the top. But it was more than he managed all day, and something about the quiet, deliberate feeling of it, rather than the frustrated, forceful feeling of everything before, settled into his chest like a small, important lesson. There, Kakashi said, and Naruto could hear the small smile in his voice even without turning around. That's the idea. Keep at it, but rest first. You'll make faster progress with a clear head than an exhausted one. Naruto nodded, breathing hard, and allowed himself, for the first time in days, to actually feel a little bit optimistic. That same evening, deep in the forest a couple of miles from Tazuna's house, in a hidden camp built from little more than a lean-to and a small, carefully banked fire, Zabuza Momochi lay recovering under the watchful care of the same masked figure who'd retrieved his body from the battlefield. The mask came off once they were alone, revealing a face far younger than the Hunter-Nin disguise had suggested. A boy, not much older than the genin he'd helped ambush, with delicate features and long dark hair currently tied back to keep it out of the way while he worked. He wore a simple, high-collared tunic that covered him from wrist to throat, sleeves practical and unadorned, nothing about his appearance suggesting the lethal precision he demonstrated with those Saban needles days earlier. You're healing faster than I expected, the boy said, checking the wrapped wound along Zabuza's side with careful, practiced hands. Another 2 or 3 days and you should be strong enough to move properly again. Good, Zabuza said, voice rough. Because we've got unfinished business with that bridge builder. And with his escort. The copy ninja, the boy said, quiet and thoughtful. I watched most of the fight from the tree lean before I stepped in. He's every bit as dangerous as his reputation suggests. It's not Kakashi I'm thinking about, Zabuza said, and something in his voice shifted, an edge of genuine unease creeping in that the boy had rarely heard from his mentor before. It's the kid. The blonde one. The boy's hands stilled for a moment. I saw that too. The eyes. He frowned slightly, an expression that looked almost out of place on such a gentle, composed face. I've never seen anything like that before. Not in any bingo book, not in any of the old texts you've had me study. What do you think it was? I don't know, Zabuza admitted. But I know what it felt like, standing across from it. Like hitting a wall that shouldn't have been able to stop my blade. He shifted, wincing at the movement, and stared up at the canopy overhead, thinking. There are old stories. From before the Second War, even before that. About an eye that belonged to a bloodline nobody talks about anymore, because the whole clan that carried it got wiped off the map generations ago. Uzumaki, the boy said quietly. Zabuza's narrow eyes flicked toward him, mildly surprised. You know the name? I've read about it, the boy said. A hidden village allied with the Leaf, destroyed by a coalition of enemies who feared its people's abilities too much to let it keep growing. Most of the survivors scattered. A few ended up in Konoha, if the old records are accurate. Zabuza was quiet for a long moment, processing that, the fire crackling low between them. If that boy really is carrying something out of Uzumaki old bloodlines, he said finally, then Gato picked a far more complicated job for us than either of us realized when we took it. Does that change the plan? The boy asked. No, Zabuza said, and something dark and confident settled back into his voice, the uncertainty from a moment ago folding neatly away behind it. It just means next time, we don't underestimate him. Whatever that I can do, it clearly needs him conscious and aware to use it. So next time, he smiled thinly behind the fresh bandages already being wound back across his face, we make sure he doesn't get the chance. The boy said nothing to that, though something flickered briefly behind his own quiet, watchful eyes, something that looked, if you were paying close enough attention, almost like reluctance. The next morning, Team 7's training continued, and it was on that morning that Naruto, sent out early to gather firewood along the edge of the forest surrounding Tazuna's house, more as a chore to keep him occupied between chakra exercises than anything else. First crossed paths with the boy from Zabuza's camp, though he had absolutely no idea at the time who he was actually talking to. He found him crouched beside a small clearing, gathering herbs into a woven basket with quiet, careful movements, dressed in that same high-collared, long-sleeved tunic, dark hair loose today and falling around a face so striking Naruto genuinely couldn't tell at first glance whether he was looking at a boy or a girl. Oh hey, Naruto said, arms full of firewood, pausing awkwardly. Didn't think anyone else was out here. The stranger looked up, startled for just a moment before smoothing into an expression of easy, practiced calm. Just gathering herbs for medicine, he said, gesturing at the basket. I didn't mean to intrude. Nah, it's fine, this isn't even my forest, Naruto said, and dropped his armful of firewood down beside a fallen log, glad for an excuse to take a break. I'm Naruto, by the way. Naruto Uzumaki. Haku, the boy offered, after only the briefest hesitation. You live around here? Naruto asked, settling down onto the log, genuinely curious in the unguarded way he approached most strangers, the way that had gotten him both some of his best friendships and some of his worst betrayals over the years. Somewhere nearby, Haku said, vague in a way that Naruto, still not remotely suspicious of anyone this calm and soft-spoken, didn't think twice about. May I ask you something, Naruto? Sure, go for it. Haku's dark eyes studied him for a moment, something thoughtful and careful behind them. Are you strong? The question caught Naruto off guard, and for a second his automatic, boastful response, of course I'm strong, I'm gonna be Hokage someday, caught in his throat, because something about the way Haku had asked it felt like it wasn't really about bragging rights at all. I don't know, he admitted, more honestly than he usually managed with strangers. I don't know, something weird happening with me right now, actually. Some kind of power I don't understand and can't really control yet. Feels less like being strong and more like carrying around a really heavy secret I don't know what to do with. Haku's expression shifted, something that might have been sympathy passing briefly across his face. I think, he said slowly, that having something precious to protect is what makes a person truly strong, not power on its own. Power without a reason behind it is just noise. Naruto blinked, turning that over. Something precious to protect, huh? He thought about it, about Team 7, about Sakura and even prickly, difficult Sasuke, about Kakashi's quiet faith in him, about a village that had never given him much reason to want to protect it, and yet somehow, despite everything, still did. Yeah, he said finally, a small, genuine smile creeping across his face. Yeah, I think I get what you mean. Haku smiled back, soft, a little sad in a way Naruto couldn't place, and rose from where he'd been crouched, basket of herbs balanced against one hip. I hope you find your strength, Naruto. Truly. He paused, glancing back over one shoulder as he turned to leave. For what it's worth, I think you already have more of it than you realize. And then he was gone, vanishing into the trees with a quiet grace that Naruto, in hindsight, really should have found more suspicious than he did. He sat there for a while after Haku left, turning the conversation over in his mind, thinking about precious things worth protecting, before finally gathering his firewood back up and heading home. No idea whatsoever that he just spent 20 minutes chatting amiably with the very person who'd helped nearly get him killed on a bridge in just a few days' time. That night, back at Tazuna's house, Naruto found Kakashi alone on the porch again, staring out at the darkening tree-line with the specific stillness of a man thinking about something he hadn't decided how to say yet. Hey, Naruto said, dropping down beside him. You look like you're plotting something. Thinking, Kakashi corrected, mild amusement flickering across his face before settling back into something more serious. About your eyes, actually. I want to try something with you tomorrow. A more structured exercise if you're willing. Yeah, of course, Naruto said immediately, sitting up straighter. It's not going to be as simple as tree climbing, Kakashi warned. I want you to try reaching for that same sensation you described, the pressure behind your eyes, but in a calm, controlled setting, without a life-threatening emergency forcing it open. I have a theory, and I want to test it. What's your theory? Kakashi considered the question for a moment before answering. Both times your eyes activated, it wasn't really about danger to you. The chain on the road, you told me it was aimed at you, but you also said you saw it clearly enough to dodge it, which suggests some early trigger before the actual threat fully closed in. And on the water, it activated the instant you decided to throw yourself in front of that blade for someone else's sake. He glanced sideways at Naruto. I don't think this bloodline responds purely to danger. I think it responds to intent, specifically, the intent to protect something, or someone, at real cost to yourself. Naruto sat with that for a long moment, Haku's words from that morning drifting back to him unbidden. Having something precious to protect is what makes a person truly strong. That's... He started, then trailed off, something clicking together in his chest that he didn't quite have words for yet. That's what? Kakashi prompted. Nothing, Naruto said, shaking his head slightly, though the small, private smile on his face suggested it was very much not nothing. Just something somebody said to me today. I think you might be onto something, sensei. Good, Kakashi said. Then tomorrow, we test it properly. The exercise the next morning was, on its surface, almost embarrassingly simple. Kakashi had Naruto sit still in the garden, eyes closed, and instead of trying to force his chakra or force the transformation the way he'd been doing with the tree climbing, he asked Naruto to think, really think, about the people and things he most wanted to protect. Sakura's occasionally overbearing but genuine care for her teammates, Sasuke's fierce, complicated loyalty buried under all that ice. Iruka-sensei's steady kindness across years when almost nobody else offered him any. The old man Hokage's tired, patient faith in him. Even, strange as it felt to admit, this whole broken, struggling village of Wave they'd stumbled into protecting almost by accident. Now hold that feeling, Kakashi said quietly, watching closely. Don't force anything. Just hold it, and see what happens. For a long moment, nothing did. Then, slowly, so slowly Sakura and Sasuke, watching from a few feet away, nearly missed it. The air around Naruto seemed to shift, a faint pressure gathering that had nothing to do with wind, and his eyes, still closed, began to glow faintly violet-blue beneath the lids. Naruto, Kakashi said, carefully controlled excitement creeping into his voice for the first time since Naruto had known him. Open your eyes. Slowly. He did. The rings were there. Not as overwhelming as they'd been during the actual fight, softer somehow, more like a gentle current than a flood, but undeniably present, undeniably his this time, called forward by his own intention instead of a knife's edge away from his throat. Whoa, Naruto breathed, staring down at his own hands, feeling that same expanded awareness settle over him again, quieter this time, more manageable. He could feel Sakura's presence a few feet away, not her thoughts, nothing that invasive, just the shape of her chakra, the warmth of her concern. He could feel Sasuke's tightly coiled focus, and even, faintly, Tazuna's weary, worried presence somewhere inside the house. How do you feel? Kakashi asked. Good, Naruto said, and meant it, something settling into place inside him that had been unsteady since the moment this had all started. Really good, actually. Like I finally get to hold the steering wheel instead of just getting dragged along. Can you hold it? Kakashi pressed. Without losing focus, Naruto concentrated, and the rings held steady, humming faintly at the edge of his awareness. He grinned, a real one, wide and unguarded. Yeah, I think I can. Then let's see what it can actually do, Kakashi said, and for the first time since this whole strange journey had started, there was something almost like genuine excitement in his sensei's voice. Slowly, carefully. We don't know yet what this bloodline is capable of, or what it costs you to use it, so we start small. They spent the rest of the morning like that, Naruto holding the activation as long as he could manage, testing small, careful things under Kakashi's watchful direction. He found he could sense chakra signatures at a distance far greater than normal, could feel the rough shape and location of everyone in and around Tazuna's house even with his eyes closed. When Kakashi tossed the kunai at him without warning, slow, controlled, nothing dangerous, Naruto caught it out of the air on his very first try. That same eerie predictive clarity from the fight on the water flickering briefly to life again, smaller and gentler this time, entirely his own to command. He couldn't yet recreate the strange repelling force that had stopped Zabuza's blade. That, it seemed, still needed something closer to genuine desperation to call forward. But even without it, the sheer control he was starting to build over the rest of it felt like standing on solid ground for the first time since this whole thing began. By early afternoon, exhausted but glowing with a satisfaction that had nothing to do with chakra, Naruto let the activation fade, his eyes settling back into their ordinary, familiar blue. That's enough for today, Kakashi said, watching him carefully for any sign of the same bone-deep exhaustion that had followed the fight on the water. How do you feel now? Tired, Naruto admitted. But not bad tired. Good tired. Like after training hard, not like after almost getting killed. That's an encouraging sign, Kakashi said. It suggests the ability draws on a chakra reserve that scales with control rather than raw desperation. The panic-triggered version on the water probably pulled far more than it needed to, which is why it wiped you out completely afterward. He studied Naruto for a long moment, something thoughtful settling behind his visible eye. This is a real bloodline, Naruto. Whatever it's called, wherever it came from, it's yours, and it's only going to grow from here. Naruto sat with that for a moment, looking down at his own hands again, remembering Haku's quiet words from the day before. I think you already have more strength than you realize. Do you think, he said slowly, the old man's gonna know what it is? When we tell him? I think, Kakashi said, the third Hokage has forgotten more about this village's history than most people will ever learn. If anyone can help us understand what you're carrying, it's him. Neither of them knew, of course, that half a country away, that exact same Hokage was, at that very moment, hunched over an old salvaged scroll in a lamplit office late into the night, tracing his finger along a faded illustration of concentric blue rings, slowly piecing together a history that had been buried for over a decade. That evening, the mood at Tazuna's house was lighter than it had been in days. Genuine, easy conversation over dinner, Sakura peppering Naruto with excited questions about what the sensing ability actually felt like, even Sasuke, in his own clipped, reluctant way, admitting it was not bad that Naruto was finally getting some control over it. But the calm didn't last long. Just as they were finishing the meal, a quiet knock sounded at the door, and Tazuna's face went pale the moment he opened it to find a nervous, out-of-breath villager standing on the doorstep, delivering grim news that had been rippling through the fishing village all afternoon. Gato's men had been spotted moving in greater numbers than usual, and word around the docks was that the bridge itself would be targeted directly within days, not weeks. Construction accelerated by a workforce Tazuna had been quietly rallying despite the danger, which meant Gato's patience, evidently, had finally run out. He's not going to wait for Zabuza to recover, Kakashi said grimly. Once the villager had gone and the whole table had absorbed the news in heavy silence. If Gato's moving up his timeline, that means we don't have as much time as we thought to prepare. Do you think Zabuza's really still alive? Sakura asked quietly, echoing the question that had been hanging unspoken over the whole household since Kakashi had first raised the possibility days earlier. I'd put money on it, Kakashi said. Which means we should expect him to come back stronger, smarter, and ready for whatever surprised him the first time. His gaze flicked briefly but meaningfully toward Naruto. That includes you. Naruto swallowed, the easy satisfaction of the day's progress giving way to something heavier, more serious. He thought about Haku's words again, about precious things worth protecting, about Tazuna's exhausted, desperate hope for his village's future riding on a bridge that hadn't even been finished yet. Then we'll be ready too, he said, and for once there was no bravado in it at all, just quiet, steady resolve. Whatever Zabuza's got planned, whatever these eyes can actually do, I'm not gonna let him hurt anyone else because I couldn't figure it out in time. Kakashi studied him for a long moment, something that looked almost like pride flickering behind his visible eye. Good, he said simply. Then let's make sure the next few days count. Outside, the sun sank low behind the trees, painting the sky overwave in deep, bruised shades of orange and violet, and somewhere out past the tree line, in a hidden camp built from little more than a lean-to and a low fire, Zabuza Momochi opened his eyes for the first time in 2 days, fully conscious, fully recovered, already turning over the shape of his next attack. The bridge was almost finished, and so, in more ways than one, was the calm. The morning the bridge attack finally came, Naruto woke up already knowing something was wrong. It wasn't the misdream this time, that one had stayed quiet the past 2 nights, as if whatever ancient presence lived behind his eyes understood he needed real sleep more than cryptic conversations. It was something simpler than that. A tightness in the air. The kind of stillness that settles over a place right before a storm breaks, when even the birds seem to know enough to go quiet. He found Kakashi already awake in the main room, fully dressed, headband pulled down low over his left eye the way he always kept it when he wasn't actively fighting. You feel it too, Kakashi said, not a question. Yeah, Naruto admitted. Is that the eyes doing that, or is it just, like, a normal ninja thing? Bit of both, probably, Kakashi said, allowing the faintest smile. Get Sasuke and Sakura up. We're heading to the bridge with Tazuna today, and I have a feeling it's not going to be a quiet morning. He was right, of course. He usually was. Tazuna insisted on going to the bridge himself despite every reasonable argument Kakashi raised against it. His workers were counting on him, he said, and hiding at home while other men risked Gado's wrath in his name wasn't something he could live with. Tsunami saw them off at the door, worry etched deep into her face, tightening the sash of her long-sleeved indigo robe like she could somehow armor herself against the fear of what the day might bring by sheer force of habit. "Take care of my father," she said quietly, to all four of them, though her eyes lingered longest on Naruto. "You got it," Naruto promised, flashing her a grin that felt a little more forced than he wanted it to. The walk to the bridge was quiet in a way that felt heavier than any of their earlier missions had. No idle chatter from Naruto, no bickering, just 4 sets of footsteps and the growing, unmistakable sense that whatever waited for them at the end of this road was going to be worse than anything they'd faced so far. They found the bridge shrouded in an unnatural fog the moment they arrived, thick, low-hanging mist that had no business existing under a clear morning sky, and every worker who should have been there was gone, either fled or, more likely, given a very persuasive reason to stay far away. "Zabuza," Kakashi said quietly, already scanning the fog. "He's not being subtle about it this time." A slow, mocking laugh rolled out from somewhere within the mist, and a familiar bandaged figure emerged at its edge, that massive cleaver blade resting easy across one shoulder, looking fully recovered and, if anything, more dangerous than he had the first time. "Copy ninja," Zabuza said. "I was starting to think you'd chicken out." "Wouldn't dream of it," Kakashi said, pushing his headband up off his Sharingan eye with the same unbothered calm he always carried into a fight. Beside Zabuza, a second, smaller figure stepped forward out of the mist, slight build, a plain porcelain mask hiding the face entirely, dressed in the muted colors of a hunter nin. Naruto's stomach dropped. He recognized that build. That quiet, careful way of moving. The mask couldn't hide it from him, not after a whole conversation spent sitting across from this exact person in a forest clearing just days ago. "Haku?" he said before he could stop himself. The masked figure went very slightly still. "You know each other?" Zabuza asked, a note of genuine surprise cutting through his usual dry amusement. Haku said nothing, but the silence answered the question well enough on its own, and Naruto felt something cold and betrayed twist in his chest. The memory of that conversation about precious things worth protecting curdling into something a lot more complicated now that he understood exactly who he'd been talking to. "You lied to me," Naruto said, voice tight. "I never lied," Haku said quietly, voice muffled behind the mask but unmistakably the same gentle, careful voice from the forest. "I simply didn't tell you everything. There's a difference, even if it doesn't feel that way to you right now." "Enough catching up," Zabuza cut in, tone hardening. "Haku. Deal with the Uchiha brat and the girl. I'll handle Kakashi personally this time, and this time, no surprises." His narrow eyes flicked, deliberately, toward Naruto. "As for you," he said, "we've got something special planned. Wouldn't want those eyes of yours getting a fair fight." Kakashi's stance shifted, alarm flickering behind his visible eye. "Naruto, stay close to." He didn't get to finish the sentence. Zabuza moved, blindingly fast, closing the distance and forcing Kakashi into an immediate, all-out defense, and in the same instant Haku vanished into the mist, reappearing an eye blink later directly between Sasuke and Sakura with both hands already weaving through a rapid, unfamiliar sequence of one-handed seals. "Senso Hyoso," Haku murmured, almost apologetic even as he said it, and slammed a palm down against the bridge's damp surface. The world exploded into ice. If you've seen this fight before, in the original telling of this story, you already know how devastating Haku's crystal ice mirrors technique is. Dozens of mirror-like panels of ice rising up out of nowhere to encircle a target, trapping them inside a dome of reflective surfaces that Haku could step through and attack from at will, appearing and vanishing between reflections faster than the human eye could track. Sasuke barely had time to register the ice rising around him before he was trapped inside it, and Sakura's scream cut through the mist as she found herself shoved backward, outside the closing dome, separated from her teammate by a wall of glittering, deadly ice. "Sasuke!" she shrieked, throwing herself against the nearest mirror, uselessly. Inside the dome, Saban needles began raining down from every angle at once, faster than any single set of eyes should have been able to track, each one aimed with lethal precision but landing, again and again, in shallow, deliberately non-fatal spots, arms, legs, shoulders, as if the person throwing them was reluctant to actually finish the job even while going through the motions of a real fight. Why are you doing this? Sasuke gritted out, already bleeding from a dozen small wounds, activating his own Tsutomu Sharingan in a desperate bid to keep pace with an opponent who seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere at once. Because I have someone precious to protect too, Haku's voice answered, soft and sorrowful, echoing off 100 mirrored surfaces at once. I'm sorry. I truly am. Outside the ice dome, Sakura threw herself at the mirrors again and again, tears streaking down her face, powerless to break through, while a few dozen feet away Kakashi and Zabuza traded blows in a blur of steel and shadow clones and Sharingan read counters, either one gaining a clean advantage. And Naruto stood frozen for one horrible, endless second, staring at the ice dome, at Sasuke's blurred silhouette taking hit after hit inside it, at Sakura's desperate, useless attempts to break through from the outside. Something precious to protect. Haku's own words from that forest clearing echoed back at him with brutal, ironic clarity. He didn't think. He just ran. Naruto, don't! Kakashi's shout barely reached him over the chaos. But it didn't matter. Nothing could have stopped him at that point. Some deep, stubborn part of him already fully committed before his conscious mind had even finished processing the danger. He hit the ice dome's outer wall at a dead sprint, and, with a burst of pure, desperate chakra, simply forced his way through a gap between two mirrors before they could seal shut behind Sasuke completely, tumbling into the enclosed space just as another volley of Senbon rained down from every angle. Naruto? Sasuke's voice, somewhere between disbelief and fury. What are you doing? Get out of here, this isn't your fight. Shut up, yes it is! Naruto snapped back, scrambling to his feet, already scanning the mirrored walls for any sign of Haku's reflection. You're on my team. That makes it my fight whether you like it or not. A fresh volley of Senbon answered that declaration, and Naruto barely managed to yank Sasuke down out of the way in time, both of them hitting the icy ground hard as needles whistled overhead. There's too many angles, Sasuke ground out, breathing hard, blood dripping from a dozen shallow wounds. I can track him with the Sharingan, but he moves between the mirrors too fast to actually hit back. Then we need a different plan, Naruto said, mind racing, and something in the back of his thoughts, quiet, patient, familiar, stirred awake, offering itself without him even having to reach for it this time. Protect him, the presence seemed to whisper, wordless and certain. That's all you have to decide. The rest will follow. Naruto closed his eyes for the barest fraction of a second, and thought, not about danger to himself, not about winning, just about Sasuke, infuriating and cold and lonely in his own complicated way. Still someone Naruto had decided, somewhere in the past few weeks without ever quite admitting it out loud, that he refused to let get hurt on his watch. He thought about Sakura outside the dome, sobbing and helpless. He thought about the whole reason he'd thrown himself through a wall of ice in the first place. I want to protect them. Both of them. Whatever it takes. The pressure bloomed open behind his eyes, faster and steadier than it ever had before. No hesitation, no fumbling, just a clean, sudden clarity flooding through him as the rings settled into place. Whoa, Sasuke breathed, catching sight of it even mid-crisis, some old academy rivalry instinct flaring briefly beneath the shock. Your eyes. Yeah, I know, we can talk about it later, Naruto said, already rising to his feet, and this time, when the next volley of Senbon hissed out from a mirror above and to the left, he didn't just see it coming. He felt Haku's chakra signature itself, the shape of it, the exact mirror he was about to step out from, the fractional half-second before the strike would launch, laid out with the same eerie, total clarity he'd first tapped into on the water days ago, except sharper now, steadier, his in a way it hadn't quite been before. He shoved Sasuke sideways, out of the Senbon's path, and this time, instead of just reacting, he moved to meet it. Here's the part of this fight that's different from anything you've seen in the original story, so pay close attention. As the Senbon closed in, Naruto raised one hand, the same instinctive gesture from the fight on the water, and this time, instead of a simple deflection, something more deliberate happened. The air around his palm rippled, visibly this time, distorting like heat over summer asphalt, and the incoming needles didn't just glance off course. They stopped completely, hanging suspended for one impossible half-second in a bubble of warped, shimmering air, before dropping harmlessly to the ice below. Haku's reflection, visible for just a moment in the mirror he'd stepped halfway out of, went very still. That's... Haku murmured, disbelieving. My turn, Naruto said, and moved. He didn't have a plan beyond the raw, driving need to close the distance before Haku could retreat back into the safety of another mirror, and for once, his new clarity gave him exactly what he needed to make it work. He tracked the telltale shimmer of chakra gathering at the mirror's surface a half-second before Haku's next movement, and lunged at the right mirror instead of guessing, catching Haku's wrist just as he tried to slip back through the ice. Contact. The moment Naruto's hand closed around Haku's wrist, something happened that neither of them expected. A surge of chakra passing between them, brief and disorienting, and for one strange, vertiginous instant Naruto felt something that wasn't quite pain and wasn't quite anything he had words for. A flicker of Haku's own memories, fast and fragmented, an image of a woman with gentle eyes, the cold of an abandoned childhood, the desperate, hollow ache of believing yourself worthless until someone finally saw value in you. Naruto gasped and let go on instinct, stumbling back. And Haku, equally startled, wrenched free and retreated several steps, one hand pressed to his own chest like he'd been struck by something far more invasive than a simple grab. What was that? Haku said, voice for once losing its careful, gentle composure entirely. I don't know, Naruto admitted, breathing hard, his own head spinning with fragments of a stranger's grief that weren't his to carry and yet, somehow, briefly, had been laid bare to him anyway. I saw something. About you. Sasuke, still catching his breath a few feet away, watched the exchange with sharp, calculating attention even through his own exhaustion and blood loss. Naruto, he said slowly, whatever that eye of yours just did, it rattled him. Use it again. Haku's mask, cracked slightly along one edge from the earlier scramble, revealed a sliver of pale, startled face beneath it. He recovered fast, though, retreating back into the practiced calm that had carried him through every fight before this one. It doesn't matter what you felt, Haku said, steadying himself, Saban already reappearing between his fingers. I have a precious person to protect too. I won't stop, no matter what your eyes can do. He vanished back into a mirror, and the volley resumed, faster this time, angrier, whatever composure Haku had left visibly fraying at the edges. The fight that followed was brutal, chaotic, and unlike anything Naruto had experienced before, not because Haku's assault grew any less precise, but because Naruto, for the first time, was actually keeping pace with it. Every time a mirror shimmered with the telltale sign of an incoming strike, Naruto felt it a half-second before it launched, that strange, borrowed clarity laying the battlefield out ahead of him like a puzzle he finally had the pieces to solve. He couldn't stop every hit. Sasuke, moving on raw Sharingan instinct beside him, still took several more shallow wounds, and Naruto himself picked up a nasty gash along one forearm when he mistimed a block by a fraction of a second. But the tide was shifting, slowly, unmistakably, away from Haku's total control. Your control's getting better, Sasuke muttered at one point, grudging respect audible even through gritted teeth. Both of them pressed back to back in the center of the dome as Saban rained down around them. Yeah, well, don't get used to it, Naruto shot back, half a laugh buried under the strain in his voice. This is basically my third day having this thing work right. Outside the dome, the fight between Kakashi and Zabuza had reached its own breaking point. Kakashi's Sharingan finally, gradually gaining the upper hand, forcing Zabuza onto the defensive with a combination of speed and prediction the missing Nin couldn't quite counter. Sakura, still trapped outside the ice dome, had stopped trying to break through by force and instead circled it anxiously, kunai in hand, watching for any opening at all to help her trapped teammates. And inside the dome, the moment that would change everything was quietly, inexorably approaching. Haku, growing increasingly desperate as Naruto's borrowed clarity continued to erode every advantage his mirrors had once provided, made a decision, the kind of decision Naruto would later understand far better than he wanted to. Once he'd had time to sit with everything Haku had told him in that forest clearing about precious people worth protecting, he targeted Sasuke directly, a full volley aimed not to wound but to end things quickly, decisively, before Naruto's improving reflexes could intervene again. Sasuke, exhausted, bleeding, moving on fumes, didn't see it coming in time. Naruto did. He didn't think. He never seemed to, in these moments, some deep, immovable part of him simply deciding, faster than conscious thought could keep up, That this was the exact kind of moment his whole strange new power had apparently been waiting for. He threw himself in front of Sasuke exactly the way he had for the boatman days earlier, exactly the way something inside him seemed built to do whenever the people he decided to protect were in the direct path of harm. The Simban found him instead, a dozen of them, more than had ever hit him at once, biting deep into his shoulders, his chest, his arms, dropping him hard to the icy ground with a cry that cut through the entire fight and brought everything, for one horrible, frozen moment, to a complete stop. Naruto! Sasuke's voice, raw with something that sounded a lot less like academy rivalry, and a lot more like genuine fear. Naruto! Sakura screamed from outside the dome, muffled by ice but unmistakably desperate. Even Kakashi, mid-fight with Zabuza, flinched at the sound, his single Sharingan eye flicking toward the ice dome for just a fraction of a second Zabuza very nearly capitalized on, before the copy ninja's instincts dragged his focus back to his own fight. Inside the dome, Haku froze too, staring down at the boy he'd struck, something raw and conflicted flashing across the sliver of face visible beneath his cracked mask. "Why?" Haku said, quiet and stricken. "Why would you throw yourself in front of that?" Naruto, on his knees, blood soaking through his jacket, Saban still buried in a dozen shallow wounds, looked up at him with an expression that was somehow, impossibly, still defiant. "Because he's mine to protect," Naruto said, voice tight with pain but absolutely steady underneath it. "You get that better than anyone, don't you? Somebody precious. That's exactly what you told me in the forest." And that's when the pressure behind his eyes didn't just bloom open, it broke wide. "You've been waiting for this moment since Chapter 1, so let's slow down and take it seriously, because this is the biggest turning point in the whole story so far. The pain from a dozen Saban wounds should have been unbearable, should have, by any reasonable measure, been the kind of injury that put a 12-year-old flat on the ground and kept him there. Instead, something in Naruto's chest cracked open alongside the pressure behind his eyes, chakra flooding through him in a volume he never touched before, not even during the desperate, exhausting activation on the water days earlier. His eyes didn't just ripple this time. They blazed, pale violet-blue lights spilling out from rings that seemed, for just a moment, to expand beyond the boundaries of his own irises, and every mirror in Haku's dome shivered under the sudden, overwhelming pressure of his chakra signature flooding the enclosed space. "This is it," the ancient presence in the back of his mind seemed to say, warm and certain and finally, fully present in a way it never had been before. "This is what you've been carrying. Let it answer for you." Naruto rose to his feet, Saban still lodged in his skin, and for the first time since this whole strange journey had begun, he understood, not with words, not with any conscious explanation, but with the same instinctive certainty that had guided every activation so far, exactly what this particular ability was for. He reached out, not with his hand this time, but with something deeper, some invisible current of chakra flowing outward from his open eyes toward Haku's retreating, startled form, and the pain of every wound Haku had inflicted on him, every Samban strike, every ache from the fight, gathered itself up and returned, not as a weapon exactly, but as something closer to a mirror held up to its source, a full, undiluted echo of everything Haku's own attacks had cost, reflected back onto the person who'd delivered them. Haku staggered, gasping, one hand flying to his own chest as sensation flooded through him that had no obvious physical cause. The phantom sting of a dozen wounds he hadn't actually taken, laid over his own body with total, disorienting clarity. What is this?" Haku choked out, dropping to one knee, mask cracking further as the sensation overwhelmed him. "I don't know what to call it yet," Naruto said, breathing hard, blood still trickling from his own wounds but his voice steady, almost gentle despite everything. "But I think it's about balance. You hurt someone. It comes back to you. That's it. That's all it does." He wasn't wrong, though he wouldn't have the language to properly name it for weeks yet. The first true path of his awakening dojutsu, a retaliatory current that let him share, briefly and non-lethally, the exact cost of violence directed at him, or at the people standing behind him back onto whoever had dealt it. Not domination. Not conquest. Something quieter and, in its own strange way, more merciful than either. A reflection rather than a weapon, though it hit with every bit the force of one. Haku knelt on the ice, shaking, staring up at Naruto with something that had shifted, somewhere in the last few seconds, from cold professional resolve into something closer to genuine confusion. You're not trying to kill me, Haku realized, slow and disbelieving. No, Naruto said simply. I don't want to. You said it yourself, you've got someone precious to protect too. I get that. I'm not gonna hate you for fighting for that, even if it means fighting me. He took a step closer, ignoring the fresh spike of pain the movement cost him. But I've got people precious to protect too. And I'm not gonna let you hurt them. So this ends now, one way or another. The mirrors around them, no longer sustained by Haku's focus, flickered and began, slowly, to melt. Outside the dissolving dome, the fight between Kakashi and Zabuza had reached its own breaking point at almost exactly the same moment. Kakashi's Sharingan finally reading through Zabuza's last combination, cleanly enough to land a decisive strike, sending the missing Nin staggering back, blade nearly torn from his grip, blood loss from the accumulated fight finally catching up to him all at once. It's over, Zabuza, Kakashi said, breathing hard but steady, kunai leveled. Zabuza, propped against the bridge's railing, one hand pressed to a deep wound along his side, let out a rough, humorless laugh. Maybe, he admitted. But I've still got. He stopped. Because at that exact moment, the last of Haku's ice mirrors finished melting into slush, revealing a scene that clearly wasn't the one Zabuza had been expecting. His young apprentice kneeling on the wet stone, mask cracked and half fallen away, and standing across from him, bleeding from a dozen shallow wounds but very much alive and very much not delivering a killing blow, a blonde genin with strange, fading rings still visible in the last moments before his eyes settled back to ordinary blue. Haku, Zabuza said, something sharp and urgent cutting through his exhaustion. Report. I couldn't finish it, Haku said quietly, still kneeling, staring down at his own hands like he wasn't quite sure what to do with them anymore. He had every reason to end this. He didn't. The bridge fell into a strange, suspended silence. Kakashi and Zabuza still facing off, weapons still raised, but both of them, in their own way, watching the smaller drama play out between Haku and Naruto was something that looked, on Zabuza's face at least, almost like uncertainty. It was into that silence that the true final complication arrived, not from either combatant, but from a fresh, unfamiliar sound rolling in off the mist, the low rumble of dozens of footsteps, and behind them, unmistakably, the smug, wheezing laugh of a short, well-dressed man flanked by an army of hired thugs, all of them armed, all of them clearly there for one purpose only. Well, Gato said, stepping out from behind his private army with an expression of pure, contemptuous amusement, a cane in one hand more for show than support. Look at this, the great demon of the hidden mist, brought low by a couple of children. He gestured lazily at the small mountain of hired muscle behind him. Change of plans, Zabuza. I never intended to pay a missing Nin his full fee when hiring a small army was so much cheaper. Kill them all, the bridge builder, the brats, and Zabuza too, while you're at it. Saves me the trouble of a contract dispute. The bridge went dead quiet again, this time for an entirely different reason. Zabuza's expression, visible even through the bandages and blood loss, shifted into something cold and furious. You hired me to kill the old man, he said slowly, not to be disposed of like some tool once I was inconvenient. Times change, Gato said, unbothered, already turning to address his hired thugs. Kill them. All of Gato's laughter died in his throat the moment Zabuza moved. It wasn't a decision so much as a reflex, the kind of thing that happens faster than conscious thought when years of pride finally collide with a single act of naked betrayal. 1 second the missing Nin was slumped against the bridge railing, bleeding, exhausted, weaponless in every sense that mattered after his fight with Kakashi. The next, he'd torn a kunai from Haku's dropped supply kit, and closed the distance to Gato's side in a burst of speed that shouldn't have been possible from a man who just lost a duel to the copy ninja. You hired the demon of the hidden mist, Zabuza said, low and dangerous, kunai pressed flat against the small man's throat before a single one of his hired thugs could react. And you thought a few dozen street thugs with rusty swords were going to be enough to put me down? Gato made a sound that was somewhere between a whimper and a wheeze, his cane clattering to the bridge's stone surface as every last shred of his earlier smugness evaporated. Wait, we can discuss this. I'm sure there's a more profitable arrangement we can. Wrong answer, Zabuza said. What followed happened fast. Faster than Naruto, still on his knees amid the melting remains of Haku's ice mirrors, could fully track. Zabuza didn't kill Gato outright. Instead he wrenched the man forward as a shield, using the sheer shock of their employer's sudden hostage status to freeze the hired army in place just long enough for Kakashi to step in and finish reading the room the way only a jonin with a lifetime of combat experience could. "Drop your weapons," Kakashi called out, voice carrying easily across the bridge, Sharingan still spinning, "and you can walk away from this. Gato's the only one anyone here has a real problem with. The mercenaries, mostly opportunists who'd signed on for easy pay against what they'd been told would be a bridge builder and a few kids, not a fully recovered S-rank missing nin and a Sharingan-wielding jonin, exchanged uncertain glances, weapons wavering, and it took only a few more seconds of visible hesitation before the whole fragile formation began to crumble, men backing away, muttering, clearly reconsidering the value of a paycheck that came with this many complications attached. Zabuza tightened his grip on Gato's collar, ignoring the small man's increasingly frantic pleading. "This one's mine to deal with," he said, glancing toward Kakashi with something that, for the first time since they'd met, looked less like professional rivalry and more like a very tired, very human kind of understanding. "He tried to have me killed after I did the job he paid for. I think that settles our business here." Kakashi didn't argue. Some things, his expression seemed to say, weren't Konoha's to referee. Naruto watched all of this from where he still knelt on the wet stone, Senbon wounds throbbing, chakra reserves scraped down to almost nothing after the sheer volume he poured into that final, retaliatory burst against Haku. His vision swam at the edges, but he forced himself to stay upright, forced himself to keep his eyes on Haku, who hadn't moved from his own kneeling position a few feet away, mask now fully fallen away, revealing a face that looked, in this moment, achingly young and lost. "Hey," Naruto managed, voice rough. "You okay?" Haku looked up at him, clearly startled by the question. Startled, Naruto would guess later, by the fact that anyone would bother asking it at all, given everything that had just happened between them. "You should be asking that about yourself," Haku said quietly, eyes flicking to the dozen shallow wounds still bleeding through Naruto's jacket. "I did that to you." "Yeah, well, you were doing it for somebody you cared about," Naruto said, wincing as he shifted his weight. "Can't really hold that against you. Not after everything you told me." Haku was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his own hands, hands that had, until a few minutes ago, been fully prepared to kill a boy he'd shared a genuinely kind conversation with in a quiet forest clearing. "I don't understand," he admitted finally. "I was ready to end your life. You had every right to end mine just now, and the ability to do it besides. Why didn't you?" Naruto thought about it, really thought about it, despite the exhaustion dragging at every part of him, because it felt like a question that deserved an honest answer rather than another easy grin and a shrug. "Because you're not actually my enemy," he said slowly. "Zabuza's not really either, not deep down, I don't think. Gato's the one who's rotten. You two were just caught up in it, doing what you had to for somebody you cared about." He met Haku's eyes, steady despite the blood loss making the world tilt slightly at the edges. "I get that. More than you probably think I do." Across the bridge, Zabuza had finally released Gato into the custody of Kakashi and a still-shaken Sakura, who'd rushed over from outside the now-dissolved ice dome the moment the fighting had visibly stopped. The remaining mercenaries had mostly scattered, either fleeing back down the bridge or simply melting away into the tree line, unwilling to press their luck any further once it became clear the money behind the job had evaporated along with their employer's leverage. It was in the relative calm that followed, Gato stripped of his cane and his dignity both, sitting slumped and defeated against the bridge railing while Kakashi kept a wary eye on him, that Tazuna, who'd been hovering nearby the entire fight with a look of barely restrained terror, finally found his voice. Is it over?" he asked, glancing between Zabuza, still standing but visibly exhausted, and the two genin kneeling amid melting ice a few feet away. "For now," Kakashi said, his voice carrying the particular weariness of a man who'd just fought 2 consecutive S-rank engagements in under a week, "though I imagine there's still the small matter of what happens to everyone left standing on this bridge." Zabuza let out a short, humorless laugh, wiping blood from the corner of his mouth. "Relax, copy ninja. I've got no further business here. Gato's contract died the moment he tried to have me killed, and without his money backing this operation, there's not much reason for me to stick around and cause trouble for your bridge builder anymore. And Haku? Naruto asked, before he could stop himself, glancing over at the boy still kneeling beside him. Zabuza's gaze flicked toward his young apprentice, something unreadable passing behind his narrow eyes. Haku goes where I go, he said, though there was something less certain in his voice than the statement's confidence suggested. Like even he wasn't entirely sure anymore what came next for either of them, now that the job that had defined their last several weeks had collapsed into nothing. The negotiations that followed, if you could even call them that, were less a formal agreement and more a tense, exhausted understanding reached between people who'd all had more than enough of fighting for one day. Zabuza had no further orders to kill anyone. Kakashi had no standing orders to pursue a missing nin who just, in his own roundabout way, ended up on the same side of the fight against Gato's betrayal. Tazuna, more concerned with his bridge and his village's survival than with settling old scores, made it clear he had no interest in escalating things further, so long as everyone simply left in peace. What happens to him? Sakura asked quietly, nodding toward Gato, still slumped miserably against the railing. As if summoned by the question itself, a new commotion rippled through the crowd that had begun gathering at the bridge's edge. Villagers, drawn by word of the fight finally reaching town, arriving in a growing wave of people who'd spent years living under Gato's economic stranglehold and had absolutely no patience left for mercy once they recognized exactly who was sitting there, stripped of his hired muscle and his leverage both. Kakashi, reading the mood correctly, made no move to intervene as the villagers closed in. And whatever happened to Gato in the minutes that followed took place well out of frame of anything Team 7 needed to witness directly. Tazuna quietly steering the four of them back toward the unfinished end of the bridge while the crowd's low, furious murmur rose behind them. Some debts, it seemed, the village intended to collect on its own terms. By the time the sun began sinking toward the horizon that evening, the bridge, battered, scarred by the fight, but still standing, had become something else entirely. Not a battlefield anymore, but the site of a quiet, exhausted kind of celebration, villagers slowly trickling back to inspect the damage and begin, almost immediately, planning how to finish what Gato's reign of terror had spent years trying to prevent. Zabuza and Haku lingered at the bridge's edge as the crowd's attention moved elsewhere, either one in any particular hurry to leave, both of them clearly turning over the same unspoken question. What did either of them actually have left to go back to, now that the job, the money, and the purpose that had organized their lives for the past several weeks had all evaporated at once? Naruto approached them once Kakashi had finished bandaging the worst of his wounds, moving a little stiffly but steady enough on his feet. Hey, he said. You guys got somewhere to go? Zabuza's narrow eyes studied him for a moment, some old, habitual suspicion flickering there before settling into something more tired than wary. Not particularly, he admitted. Missing nin don't exactly have a lot of doors open to them. There's always the land of water, Haku offered quietly, though his voice carried little conviction behind the suggestion. Not while the current regime's still hunting bloodline users, Zabuza said, a flicker of old bitterness in his voice that Naruto, without fully understanding the history behind it, still recognized as something painful he probably shouldn't press on. Naruto hesitated, then said the thing that had been sitting in his chest since the fight had ended. For what it's worth, thanks. For not finishing me off back there, when you probably could have, if you'd really wanted to. And Haku, he glanced over, meeting the other boy's eyes, thanks for what you said in the forest too, about having something precious to protect. I don't think I would have figured out how to use my eyes properly without thinking about that. Haku's expression softened into something that looked, for the first time since the mask had come off, genuinely at peace. I'm glad it helped, he said simply. I meant it, for what it's worth, even under the circumstances. Zabuza watched the exchange with an expression that gave very little away, though something in the set of his shoulders had eased considerably since the fight's end. Well, he said eventually, hefting his massive blade back up onto one shoulder despite the visible strain it cost him, I suppose we'll be moving on, then. Wherever that ends up being. He paused, glancing back at Naruto one more time, something almost like genuine respect flickering behind his tired eyes. That eye of yours, he said. Whatever it turns out to be, you'd do well to keep it quiet as long as you can. Powers like that draw attention. Powerful attention. The kind that doesn't always have your best interests at heart. He hefted his blade a little higher. Watch yourself, kid. And with that, he turned and walked off the bridge, Haku falling into step half a pace behind him, and within a few minutes both of them had vanished into the tree line beyond, leaving Team 7 standing on a battered, unfinished bridge under a sky slowly bleeding orange into violet. The whole strange, brutal week finally, genuinely over. Naruto watched them go, turning Zabuza's warning over in his mind, and felt, for the first time since this whole journey had started, the first real flicker of unease about exactly what kind of attention he might be inviting once word of this eventually got back to Konoha. The days that followed passed in a slower, gentler rhythm than anything the team had experienced since arriving in Wave. With Gato gone and his stranglehold broken, the local economy began, almost immediately, to loosen, trade routes reopening, workers returning to the bridge in genuinely enthusiastic numbers now that they were building something for their own future instead of laboring under threat. Tazuna, buoyed by the sudden shift in fortune, insisted the team stay for the bridge's completion, an offer Kakashi, still recovering fully from his own chakra exhaustion, was more than happy to accept. Naruto used the recovery time to keep practicing, gently, under Kakashi's watchful direction, not pushing for anything as dramatic as the retaliatory path he'd tapped into against Haku, but simply reinforcing the calmer, controlled activation he'd built over the past week, strengthening the sensing ability, the predictive clarity, the small, steady discipline of calling his eyes open and closed on his own terms rather than being dragged along by desperation. You've made more progress in a week than I would have expected, Kakashi told him one afternoon, watching Naruto hold a controlled activation steady for several minutes at a stretch without visible strain. Whatever this bloodline is, it seems to respond well to genuine intention rather than raw force. That's a good sign. Still don't know what to call it, though, Naruto said, letting the activation fade, rubbing at his eyes out of habit even though they didn't actually hurt anymore when he used it properly. We'll find out, Kakashi said. Once we're back in the village. The bridge was completed on their final morning in Wave, and the whole town turned out for the occasion, a modest but heartfelt celebration. None of the excess Naruto might have expected from stories of festivals back in Konoha. Everything scaled to what a town rebuilding itself from years of economic strangulation could actually afford, but no less genuine for the restraint. Tazuna stood at the head of the newly finished bridge, addressing the gathered crowd with visible emotion, and when it came time to name the completed structure, there was surprisingly little debate about what that name should be. The Great Naruto Bridge, Tazuna announced, to a ripple of approving murmurs from the crowd, and Naruto, who'd spent an entire childhood being looked at with suspicion and distance by nearly everyone he'd ever met, felt something warm and entirely unfamiliar settle into his chest at the sound of his own name being spoken with that much genuine gratitude. You didn't have to do that, he told Tazuna afterward, scratching the back of his neck, uncharacteristically bashful. I wanted to, Tazuna said gruffly, clapping a hand on his shoulder. This bridge exists because you and your team refused to walk away when things got dangerous. Around here, that's worth remembering. It was, Naruto thought, watching the sun glint off the newly laid stone, exactly the kind of moment he'd always imagined might be waiting for him somewhere down the road. Proof, concrete and undeniable, that he could matter to people who had no history with him, no old grudges, nothing but the plain evidence of what he'd actually done standing in front of them. He didn't know yet how much bigger that feeling was about to get tested. Once they were back within Konoha's walls and the eyes that had made all of this possible finally came to the attention of the people who mattered most. The journey home took 2 full days, and by the time the 4 of them passed back through Konoha's main gates, tired and travel-worn but intact, word had already reached the village that Team 7's simple C rank had escalated into something considerably more dangerous than anyone back home had anticipated. Report to the Hokage immediately, the Chunin on gate duty told Kakashi, with the particular briskness of someone relaying an order they'd been specifically instructed to deliver the moment the team arrived. He's been expecting you. Naruto exchanged a glance with Sakura and Sasuke, an unspoken question passing between all 3 of them. Expecting us, or expecting me? They found out the answer soon enough. The Hokage's office looked exactly the way it always did, cluttered with scrolls, a haze of old piped smoke that had long since faded into the walls themselves. The third Hokage seated behind his desk in the familiar white and red robes he'd worn for longer than Naruto had been alive. But something about the atmosphere in the room felt different the moment they stepped inside, a weight to the silence that hadn't been there on any of Naruto's previous, considerably less eventful mission reports. Kakashi, Hiruzen said, setting down the report scroll he'd apparently already been reading, a preliminary account, Naruto realized. That must have been sent ahead by Messenger Hawk once the fight on the bridge concluded. I trust the mission is fully resolved? It is, Kakashi confirmed. Though as I imagine you've gathered from the report, it escalated well beyond the original C-rank parameters. I'll provide a full account, but there's something else that needs discussing first, and I believe it takes priority. Hiruzen's gaze shifted, deliberately, to Naruto, and something in the old man's weathered face, a careful, searching quality Naruto had never quite seen directed at him before, made his stomach tighten with sudden nerves. Team 7, Hiruzen said. Sakura, Sasuke, please wait outside for a moment. I need to speak with Kakashi and Naruto privately. Sakura opened her mouth, visibly wanting to protest, but a look from Kakashi settled it, and she and Sasuke filed out into the hallway, though not without both of them casting curious, worried glances back at Naruto before the door clicked shut behind them. Alone with the Hokage and Kakashi, Naruto felt the nervous tightness in his chest climb another notch. Naruto, Hiruzen said, gently but with unmistakable gravity. I need you to tell me, in your own words, exactly what happened with your eyes during this mission. Naruto told him everything, the dreams that had started days before the mission even began, the flicker on the road against the Demon Brothers, the full activation on the water against Zabuza, the week of careful training with Kakashi that had followed, and finally, haltingly, the moment inside Haku's ice dome when the pressure behind his eyes had broken wide open into something he still didn't fully have words for. Hiruzen listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable throughout most of the account, though something in his eyes sharpened noticeably the moment Naruto described the retaliatory ability he'd used against Haku. The pain, redirected rather than inflicted anew, a mirror rather than a blade. When Naruto finished, the office fell into a long, heavy silence. May I see them? Hiruzen asked finally. Your eyes, I mean. If you're able to activate the ability here safely. Naruto glanced at Kakashi, who gave a small, encouraging nod, and closed his eyes, reaching, the way he practiced all week, not for danger, not for desperation, but for the quiet, deliberate intention that had carried him through every controlled activation since the garden exercises in Wave. He thought of Sakura and Sasuke waiting anxious and curious in the hallway outside. He thought of the old man in front of him, who'd looked out for him in his own gruff, distant way for as long as he could remember. He thought of the whole strange, complicated village that had never quite decided whether to embrace him or fear him, and that he still, somehow, despite everything, wanted to protect. The pressure bloomed open, gentle and steady, and he opened his eyes. Hiruzen went very still. For a long moment, the old Hokage simply stared, something passing behind his own weathered eyes that looked, disconcertingly, like recognition mixed with something closer to old, quiet grief. Concentric rings, Hiruzen murmured, half to himself. Pale blue. No visible pupil. He rose slowly from his desk, moving to a locked cabinet along the far wall, and retrieved from it a single, ancient scroll, its edges brittle with age, which he unrolled carefully across his desk, revealing a faded illustration that made Naruto's breath catch in his throat. The same eyes. Rendered in ink that had once, clearly, been colored the exact same deep, unmistakable blue. What is that? Naruto asked, voice quieter than he meant it to be. A fragment, Hiruzen said, salvaged decades ago from the ruins of a village that no longer exists. Uzumaki, the hidden whirlpool village. Your mother's home, Naruto, before it was destroyed. Naruto's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew almost nothing about his mother, a handful of scattered facts, most of them offered reluctantly, most of them incomplete. The idea that some piece of her, some piece of the home she'd lost, might be sitting right here in front of him, illustrated on an ancient scroll, hit him with a force he hadn't braced for. This is from her village? He asked. This eye? It's an Uzumaki thing? I believe so, Hiruzen said carefully. Though I want to be clear with you, Naruto, this record is fragmentary. Incomplete. Whatever knowledge Uzumaki once had about this bloodline was largely lost when the village fell, generations before you were even born. What little survived came to us in pieces, salvaged by refugees and scholars who understood only a fraction of what they were preserving. He traced a finger along the scroll's faded edge, something old and sorrowful in the gesture. I did not expect, in my lifetime, to see this eye open in front of me. I confess I'm not entirely certain what to make of it. But it is real, Kakashi said. Whatever its origins, it's not some fluke or illusion. I've watched it deflect a killing blow, and reflect an opponent's own attacks back onto them. Whatever this bloodline turns out to be, it's dangerous, and it's growing. Hiruzen nodded slowly, rolling the ancient scroll back up with careful, deliberate hands. That's precisely what concerns me, he said. A bloodline this rare, this powerful, awakening in a boy who already carries. He paused, choosing his next words with obvious care, mindful even now of a secret Naruto had only fully understood himself a few months earlier, who already carries a great deal of attention from certain quarters, for reasons we don't need to revisit here. If word of this spreads beyond this room, Naruto, I fear it will draw exactly the kind of interest neither of us wants directed at you. Zabuza said something like that too, Naruto admitted quietly. Before he left. Said powers like this draw attention, and not always the good kind. He wasn't wrong, Hiruzen said. There are factions within this very village, Naruto, who would see a discovery like this as an opportunity rather than a responsibility. I intend to make certain that doesn't happen, but it will require discretion, from all three of us. They spent the next hour going over the practical details, what would and wouldn't be recorded in the official mission report. Who within the village's command structure absolutely needed to know versus who could remain in the dark for now. How Naruto's ongoing training with the ability would need to be handled carefully enough to avoid drawing unwanted attention from anyone watching for exactly this kind of anomaly. I want to assign you a more structured training schedule, Hiruzen said, near the end of the conversation, separate from your regular team exercises. Though I'll need to think carefully about who's best positioned to oversee it without raising questions we can't easily answer. For now, Kakashi, I'll trust you to continue guiding what control building you've already started. Understood, Kakashi said. And Naruto, Hiruzen added, fixing him with a steady, serious look that cut through some of the old man's usual warmth without extinguishing it entirely. I need you to understand something important. This ability is a piece of your heritage, a piece of your mother's people. People who built something remarkable before the world took it from them. That's worth being proud of. But it's also, right now, a secret that could put you in real danger if it becomes known too widely too soon. Can I trust you to be careful with it? Even when it's difficult? Naruto thought about Sasuke and Sakura waiting in the hallway, about how badly he wanted to just tell them everything, the way he told them nearly everything else that mattered to him these days. He thought about the whole village, and how much some small, stubborn part of him had always wanted exactly this kind of moment. Proof of something extraordinary about himself, finally, undeniably real. The kind of thing that might make the years of being looked at like a burden feel a little less permanent. And then he thought about Zabuza's warning, about the weight in Hiruzen's voice when he talked about certain factions, about a mother he'd never gotten the chance to know, whose entire home had been destroyed by people who feared exactly the kind of power now waking up behind his own eyes. Yeah, he said finally, quiet but resolute. I can be careful. I promise. Hiruzen's expression softened, something like relief and something like pride mingling together behind his tired old eyes. Thank you, Naruto, he said. I know it isn't easy, keeping something this significant close to your chest. But I believe, in time, we'll find the right way to help you understand and control this properly. And when that time comes, I suspect this village is going to have every reason to be very, very proud of you. Naruto left the Hokage's office that evening with his head spinning, Sakura and Sasuke immediately descending on him with a barrage of questions the moment the door closed behind him. Questions he had to carefully, awkwardly deflect with a story about boring mission paperwork stuff that satisfied neither of them but that they, thankfully, didn't push too hard against given how exhausted everyone clearly still was. He walked home alone that night under a sky full of stars, turning over everything Hiruzen had told him, about Uzumaki, about a mother whose homeland had been erased before he was even born, About a bloodline that had apparently waited over a decade, dormant and silent, for exactly the right moment to finally wake up inside him. You're not alone in this, the ancient presence in the back of his mind seemed to murmur, quiet and warm, as he climbed the stairs to his apartment. Not anymore. He didn't have an answer for that. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, standing alone in his small, familiar apartment with the weight of an entire hidden inheritance settling gently into his chest, Naruto Uzumaki didn't feel quite as alone as he usually did. He had a secret now, a real one, dangerous and precious in equal measure. And somewhere out there, waiting just beyond the horizon of everything he currently understood, an entire world of possibility was waiting for him to finally, fully claim it. He couldn't wait to find out what came next. He had no idea that in just a matter of weeks, the Chunin exams would put that very question to the test in front of the entire village, and that the shadow of an old and dangerous Sannin was already, quietly, beginning to take an interest in exactly what Naruto Uzumaki's eyes were truly capable of.